Thank you so much. All right. Well, let's get this show on the road. All right. Good evening and welcome everybody to tonight's study session of the Boulder City Council. I'm Councilmember Matt Benjamin, and I appreciate you all joining us. We've got a bit of an action-packed evening with two items. First, we'll have a discussion about the airport, and then our second item concerns an update on the city's power resiliency and reliability. Before we get to our work, I'm going to do a little bit of outlining of how tonight's going to go. I know that first discussion is going to be one we've been debating for a long time. We've got some very specific questions, so we'll want to talk about that. And we'll review a bit of staff's presentations. We'll have time for some questions and some comments. And then at the very end, we'll make sure we get staff what they need in terms of the direction for that particular item. You know, one thing I want to set the stage for, because I know it's a big conversation, there's a lot to discuss, we've heard a lot from community, is with regards to the airport. We're being asked a fundamental land use question with regards to airport and whether we operate this indefinitely. And it's really important that we stay focused on not talking about the operational tasks. We're not being asked about grants. We're not being asked about specific funding mechanisms. But what's really important is we stay focused on what staff can do to evaluate our direction with regards to a specific land use direction. So I want to ask my colleagues to keep that framing in mind, and for your questions and your comments and our legislative authority to speak specifically to the land use and not to the financing or operations of the airport, as that is duly in the responsibility of the city manager's office. So I'll be working to keep us on track and to make sure that we're on task for tonight's conversation. I want to make sure we stay focused and questions are actually within the purview and the jurisdiction of City Council. I won't hesitate to respectfully interact, intervene, redirect, and get our questions and focus comments back on the tasks at hand because we've had a lot to converse about and we want to stay on schedule for this evening. So without any further ado, I will turn things over to the incomparable city manager, Nuria Rivera-Vandermine, to introduce our first item and get us started.
Why, thank you, Councilmember Benjamin, and good to see you all. Tonight, as you were mentioning, we're back today to get your thoughts on the future of the airport. Last time we talked about the then airport community conversations and some initial financial and regulatory constraints. A decision on that continued use of the airport site or not was deferred at that time. But we are back to discuss as our financial circumstances has certainly changed, and I am looking for another word than financially constrained because we need something new. And we have now also heard from the courts. I want to acknowledge that this discussion has elicited a lot of competing opinions. At the same time, we would be remiss if we did not raise the real concerns we currently face financially. As we prepare for next year's budget, we need better certainty about what resources we have at our disposal, and that is dependent on whether the airport will remain a working airport into the future, and that is the policy question for this body. We understand the implications of this decision. Scenario 2 would require us to seek alternative forms of funding for the ongoing operations and maintenance of the airport. We believe the sources of funding in this regard are limited and will likely mean that we will have to include subsidy from the city's transportation fund or the general fund through the end of our current grant assurances. We also know that scenario 1 would open up potential sources of funding, including FAA funds, and allow for more certainty about the future of the airport. Staff were to choose to go in that direction and accept a grant now. We also know that the FAA has currently told us that those grant assurances would obligate us into perpetuity. We could always challenge that assertion legally. Regardless of whether to move forward, and I know we have had questions, and I appreciate your framing, Councilmember Benjamin. I want to say that regardless of whether or not to move forward in new federal grants, the city preserves the right to ask the FAA to decommission the airport at any time, whether now or in the future. And I'd also be remiss again if I didn't say that the FAA currently believes that we are now in perpetuity as we stand currently. There's a lot more detail to this, so I'm going to pass it to our Director of Transportation and Mobility, Blythe, to get us started. Blythe Bailey, yours on for you.
Thank you, Nuria, and I hope everyone can hear me. I'm sure that you'll start saying something if you can't. My microphone was doing funny things a second ago, but I think I'm good. Good evening, Mayor Brockett and members of the City Council. I assume we have a presentation. I can't see. Is the council seeing a presentation? Okay.
They are about to, Blythe. There they
Great.
are.
Yeah, I see it now. Thank you. So again, thank you, Mayor Brockett. Thank you, Councilmember Benjamin, for leading the discussion, and members of the City Council. Thank you for taking a few minutes for a discussion about the future of the airport. As you know, as Nuria said, the litigation with the FAA is closed, at least for now, and we think now is the opportunity to take a look at the airport finances and other aspects of our work in light of the long-term policy direction, which has led us to forego federal grants for about the last 6 years. First, I want to lift up our new airport manager, Eric Vences, and his team. I couldn't have asked for a better airport manager to have been hired right before I got here. Eric's leadership has been crucial in understanding the recent past work, where we are today, and how we project the airport to be operated into the future based on either of the policy scenarios we're going to present to you today. Eric is available for technical questions as they arise, and I believe also Scott Carpenter may be here for financial questions if there are those that we need his assistance for. Eric will also join me on a couple of these slides. Next slide, please. So what we're talking about today is, we'll take a few minutes refreshing important background, including results of the 2022 to 23/24 airport community conversation, the legal status and the FAA's position, and provide updated financial considerations that highlight aspects of our short and long-term projections, as well as some future options to consider. Next slide. At the conclusion of our presentation, we will share again these questions for you to consider, and thank you again for some of the hotline requests. We've modified these questions and hope they bring greater clarity. So we're basically asking what questions regarding the information presented on the current or future state of the airport might you have, as well as does council have feedback to support scenario 1, which is indefinite operation of Boulder Municipal Airport, or scenario 2, which is maintained closure opportunity. Next slide. And to recap the recent timeline of airport activities, we completed the airport community conversation, which we presented to council in 2023. Per council's direction, subsequently, we completed a financial analysis and brought to the council in July 24. Two options were presented in that presentation. A scenario 1, in which we operate the airport indefinitely, and a scenario 2, in which we continue foregoing grant funding opportunities at least until 2040. As of summer 24, though, there was a ballot measure which had reached the required number of signatures, which would put the decision about the fate of the airport on the voters. So the council took a wait and see approach at that time. As a reminder, and for anyone new to the council, the city filed suit against the FAA soon thereafter, contesting the notion that we would be required to operate the airport in perpetuity. And also around the same time, the ballot measure was pulled. So with the legal case coming to resolution late in 2025, we're here to present a current information for reconsideration. Next slide, please. The city's lawsuit against the FAA was dismissed, I assume, as you all know, on procedural grounds due to lack of jurisdiction, with the judge indicating the city had not yet been harmed and wouldn't be until years in the future. So the final decision on whether or not the FAA would concur with our desired consideration to close the airport and reuse the property is pushed to 2040, as long as we continue to forego grants that would extend that time frame. So the financial trade-offs associated with foregoing federal grants until 2040 do not guarantee autonomy of the decision. They only provide for the option for us to make the case to the FAA again at that time. Next slide. In 2023, as mentioned earlier, the city launched the Airport Community Conversation to understand community aspirations for the airport's future. Through the process, we conducted about a dozen engagement events, including working group sessions, multiple open houses, and 4 bilingual community meetings. Additionally, 2 surveys were completed, with the first including over 750 responses. Through that effort, we heard a wide range of perspectives with no clear consensus. Some emphasized the airport's value for economic activity, emergency response, and aviation services, while others advocated for what they believed to be a better future use, while raising concerns about noise and leaded fuel. further emphasizing that this is an interest that continues to be widespread throughout the community. I counted earlier today over 300 emails to the Contact City of Boulder portal in the last 3 weeks alone. So clearly this is a subject that is of interest to a lot of Boulderites. Next slide, please.
During the community conversation, we frequently heard questions about the city's regulatory authority, particularly with regard to leaded fuel use and noise. To clarify, aviation regulation is governed at the federal level and is independent of whether or not local municipality takes federal grant monies. Put simply, whether we rely on federal dollars or not does not change how we can or cannot govern aviation policy, like the use of fuel types and noise. Regarding noise, we can use primary management control documents, commonly known as PMCDs, of which we are in the middle of doing that, to help tracking and notifying of noise events, but we do not have punitive powers, and even if we did, certainly can't regulate air traffic that originates and lands at an airport other than Boulder Municipal. Similarly, we are obligated to adhere to the federal guidelines around unleaded and leaded fuels. We'll talk about that in a little bit more in just a second. For now, note that a fleet-wide drop-in designation for unleaded fuel is something that is going through regulatory approvals. Fleet-wide drop-in designation just means that it would be a fuel that is compatible with all engine types for the piston aircraft. At that time, we will transition fully away from leaded fuel as identified in our unleaded aviation fuel transition plan, but we are restricted from doing so until the FAA approves that designation.
Hey, Eric, I'm sorry. Before you continue, could you just introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Eric, Boulder Airport's new airport manager. Thank you. Next slide, please. Before we turn over to the long-term policy decision question that is presented to you today, I want to briefly update Council on work that's already underway that is in response to longstanding community concerns. These efforts are independent of the decision before you tonight and will continue regardless of Council's direction, but demonstrate our commitment to work on community priorities regardless of the policy decision. As mentioned in the previous slide, noise and unleaded fuels are areas of interest for the community. Noise has been one of the most consistent concerns that we hear about. While the city cannot directly regulate aircraft noise, we have taken a number of steps to reduce impacts and improve responsiveness. I've reinstituted quarterly technical noise committee meetings. I've expanded communication of our voluntary noise abatement program, or VNAP, including 2 pilots who do not originate from Boulder, and begun regularly attending and advocating for Boulder's interests at Rocky Mountain Metro Airport's VNAP meetings. One recent example of that advocacy is when the FAA at BJC, or Rocky Mountain Metro, was adjusting their flight patterns. One of the initial routes was sending traffic to the Boulder Stacks on Arapahoe. That happens to be where our glider training area sits, and so we advocated for safety reasons to choose a new path. And as a result of that advocacy, they did change it and no longer send that traffic to the Boulder Stacks. Recent staff transitions have led to generic noise events responses, which we recognize can be frustrating to those experiencing the noise events. However, through the city's customer experience project, I aim to improve the ways that we receive notifications and to streamline the research process by utilizing a CRM, customer resolution management software add-on module that our existing airport operations monitoring service has. And we're also developing improved tenant communications through trend reporting so that we can better measure the effectiveness of this work. Moving on to the other longstanding concern, which is around the use of leaded fuels. We recently completed our unleaded fuel transition plan, and that was submitted in December, which went into effect in January of 2026. And as a result of that plan, we did apply for the division of the Colorado Airport Board's unleaded fuel incentive. And in partnership with our fixed base operator who provides fuel services at the airport, they're going to be procuring temporary infrastructure now that the city has signaled support of this initiative through the fuel subsidy. Looking further ahead, our capital improvement plan includes replacement of airport's permanent fuel tank infrastructure, which would allow us to transition fully to unleaded by the target date of 2030. And this is a critical improvement that we intend to pursue regardless of policy decision. And at the same time, it illustrates the broader financial challenge, this infrastructure upgrade alone, which is expected to cost more than $2 million, which the airport fund cannot absorb on its own. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Eric. I also want to acknowledge Eric's lean but potent team, which includes himself and his colleagues Jacques and Christian, for their persistent work bringing value with limited resources. Shown here, very recently, Eric and his team utilized a borrowed from CDOT crack sealing machine for pavement preservation, showing resourcefulness that helps manage our maintenance needs while limiting our costs. In addition to this work, Eric secured a grant from CDOT that will not extend our grant assurances for a much needed runway seal coat project that we plan to complete later this year. That grant saves the city $450,000, and in the nick of time, as our runway was resurfaced in 2020, and we generally try to apply seal coats after 5 years. It's worth noting that CDOT has indicated unwillingness to provide this grant in the future without the city signaling an intention to operate the airport indefinitely. And so to illustrate the short-term impacts of the policy direction, I want to highlight that had we not identified the CDOT grant, the full cost of the much-needed seal coating was more than what our airport fund could have been able to afford. This trend continues into next year because we've planned a seal coating for the rest of the airport's paved surfaces, not just the runway, but the aprons and other paved surfaces in 2027 at an estimated cost of $750,000, the money for which is also not available in the airport fund. So this short-term need brings into focus the time sensitivity of the fiscal challenge. As mentioned earlier, for scenario one, in which the airport is operated indefinitely, we have the ability to use discretionary FAA grants. So the cost of this planned 2027 project would be about 5% of the total cost, or about $37,500. Whereas in scenario two, the local cost equals the full cost of the project, or that $750,000 number. The seal coating of the remainder of our paved surfaces planned for next year highlights that time sensitivity of this decision, as in one scenario, our available funds are adequate to complete the work, and in the other, we would need funding from another local source. Next slide, please. Okay, I want to back out and describe the updates that we've made to the financial outlook for each scenario so that we can put into focus the fiscal trade-offs of the 14-year timeline as well. The previous slide, I intended to show the urgency of this year and of next year, but now we'll talk about the remaining 14 years as a whole. So I want to acknowledge some needed corrections also from the information that is included in your memo. Eric has used the scenarios developed for the 2024 presentation as a base and made some current day updates. In our preparation of the memo, we were more broad in our determination of these projections, and since its completion, have completed some updates to those numbers. So these numbers might look a little different, but I think they still tell the same story. The slide here represents the updated average difference between airport revenues and expenses over the next 14 years in each of the two scenarios. A negative number equates to the average amount of funding we project to be needed from other local sources on a year-to-year basis to support the airport, and a positive number reflects our estimate of how much we project the airport to be financially self-sustaining during that time. To highlight some of the updates since the last time we presented on this topic in 2024, firstly, we've operated more frugally the last 2 years than had been previously predicted. So when we presented to you in 2024, we of course didn't know what was going to happen in 2024 and 2025, and we've done better than we thought we would do. So that's made a little bit of a difference. This is the case for both scenarios. Secondly, Eric's done great work in refining and updating the assumptions for costs and revenues in both scenarios. He moved some critical capital projects out of the next 14-year timeline that we didn't think were absolutely necessary to do, and we've also assumed a reasonable amount of money we can expect from FAA discretionary grants. And this brings into contrast the financial difference between scenario one and scenario two. Put simply, over the next 14 years in scenario one, because we can make use of federal grants that would extend our assurances, we believe that we can operate the airport without requiring any other trade-offs from other funding sources. In scenario two, however, due to the year-to-year costs associated with critical capital improvements planned over the next 14 years and the inability to utilize federal grants, we expect to require assistance from other local funding sources at an average amount of about a little over $600,000 per year. Next slide, please. So the previous slide showed a yearly average between the current base and 2040, but the year-to-year budget projection varies depending on the number of years in which we plan capital projects. I do want to remind and emphasize here that these numbers come from projections made by updating our 2024 fiscal analysis with new information based on actual budget from 24 and 25, as well as updates to the assumed discretionary grants and a refreshed look at the next 14 years. There's some fundamental unpredictability in projecting out that long. And when assumptions change based on real circumstances, we learn something new, say next year or the year after. So there's real circumstances. Certainly these numbers can go up or down. But our intention here was to make an earnest effort to analyze the objective differences in cost associated with the differences between the two scenarios. With those caveats in mind, I'll point out some things to further illustrate these projections and the differences between these scenarios. You'll notice a small dip in year 2028 in scenario two. That's when we target the critical replacement of our fuel tank infrastructure that Eric mentioned a moment ago, and a couple of other capital projects whose total cost is approximately $3 million. In other years, we don't plan major capital projects, so the difference between revenue and cost is smaller. One other difference between the scenarios is important to illustrate. In scenario one, because of the practical availability of discretionary grants, we program a full pavement reconstruction in 2029, but we don't include this work at all in our CIP for scenario two. Both scenarios include preventative maintenance, seal coating and crack sealing across the next 14 years, but only one includes the cost of full pavement reconstruction. So the difference in total cost is significant from one to the other. In scenario one, the full cost of all pavement work across the full 14-year timeline is about $28 million, while in scenario two, it's only $12 million. And likewise, on the revenue side, in scenario one, over 90% of that cost is covered by revenue from FAA discretionary grants, but in scenario two, it's 100% cost to the city. Additionally, it's worth highlighting that since pavement reconstruction is not accounted for in the scenario two capital plan between now and 2040, if we get to that point and the FAA or the court ruling at that time requires indefinite airport operations thereafter, the city would face a significant additional expense in the deferred maintenance of having not fully reconstructed that pavement at that point, which we feel like would be roughly equal to the difference between those costs, or $16 million. And likely higher because of a longer period of deferment of the maintenance work. Importantly, regarding assumptions in scenario one, we've heard valid questions about how much we can expect from the federal government as it relates to whether or not they can be a reliable source of revenue for help with our ongoing capital expenses. I want to highlight again that these analyses are both dependent on predictions over a decade into the future. And while funding is not guaranteed, and certainly less predictable the farther into the future, we have relative confidence in the reliability of future aviation funding for three primary reasons. One, in the immediate term, we do not know of an effort by the executive branch to pull support for aeronautical funding like they have for other initiatives that they have publicly deprioritized. Two, our federal lobbyists in a recent EBT meeting indicated that the administration has been forthcoming with heavy transportation monies and that we might actually see more funding coming for things like aviation infrastructure. And three, the Airport and Airways Trust Program is user-funded and therefore more likely to be self-sustaining than tax revenue funded programs. Next slide, please. But this decision is not only about current operational or capital costs for the next 14 years. It's also about the potential of the use of the land that we would realize after 2040 in one of those scenarios. The slide shows Google Earth images of the Stapleton Airport in Denver, which closed in 1995 and has been gradually redeveloped over several decades. A complicated redevelopment of a site like an airport, even for ours, which is about 5% the cost of Stapleton, clearly is a large endeavor, which very likely comes with a long timeline. So I thought it helpful to think through some of the reasonable assumptions about the future use of the land. Clearly, the possibility of a redevelopment of the land as far into the future, but also not dissimilar to recent thinking about the Area 3 planning reserve. A lot of work would need to be done to put a finer point on potential value or costs for the redevelopment. Such things to consider would be the need for a full site redevelopment plan, environmental and engineering studies, potential litigation, environmental remediation, site preparation, and entitlements, such as those that incentivize things like affordable housing, if that was the city's chosen direction. Next slide, please. And so while difficult to predict this far in advance, national comparisons suggest mitigation costs could range widely. Our memo uses a preliminary estimate of 10 to 30 million, which uses other comparisons we think are on the low end of complexity. Some examples suggest that if our remediation is moderate or highly complicated, costs could be 3 to 4 times that amount. We provided more explanation on these numbers in our recent hotline response earlier today. We've also obtained a preliminary broker opinion of value for the land based on market assumptions. That value would vary depending on redevelopment goals. For example, market rate development versus subsidized affordable housing. The BOV that we did lays out several high-level assumptions. First, it assumes the site represented by scenario 4 in the 2024 report. You may remember that was the only one that aligned with potential future closure of the airport and full redevelopment. And that scenario called for a mix of commercial, residential, park space, and new street infrastructure. We used that plan to provide sort of a proportion of those different uses. Second, the BOV excludes any consideration of entitlements. So for example, subsidies or requirements for the provision of affordable housing are not factored into the opinion of value. And also non-revenue producing land uses are excluded, as is the cost of horizontal infrastructure, as well as environmental remediation. So generally, the BOV values the airport at market rate. You can see the numbers based on our acreage above, as well as our future predicted numbers in 2040, as it relates to what we think the broker's opinion of value is. And as mentioned a moment ago, for a future reuse of the site, we should also be thinking about site plan and development administration, site infrastructure and entitlements, such as for affordable housing or other community needs. And next slide, please. Before wrapping up, I want to acknowledge that over the course of conversation, we've heard lots of other related questions that we'd like to try to address proactively. As I mentioned, Eric is here and available for more technical questions, but here are some of the popular questions that have arisen. First, we're frequently asked about landing fees. The FAA preempts local jurisdictions from enacting landing fees for the purpose of manipulating air traffic. For that reason, we would recommend, if we were to enact these fees, following the standard and typical rates that are usually enacted by weight. Using these typical weights, we believe that landing fees would generate revenue that would be roughly equal to the administrative cost of implementing them. Also, we hear concerns frequently about the persistent usage of leaded fuels. We did earlier provide information from the state as well as Boulder County that we had shared with the community during the community conversation that we hope helps explain the risks of exposure due to lead fuel as well as other sources, as well as the best ways to reduce exposure. As noted earlier, we don't have authority to ban the use of lead-based fuel for aircraft, but we're committed to achieving goals of our unleaded transition plan, which commits us, as Eric mentioned earlier, upon federal regulatory approval of a fleet-wide drop-in, meaning when the FAA approves the fleet-wide drop-in, at that point, we could fully transition to unleaded, and we believe that that's feasible by 2030. Regarding economic impact, we've not engaged any further studies to supplement or refute what's been cited by CDOT, but we have confirmed some major employers of the site earlier today in our hotline response, as well as information in recently completed studies that's Boulder specific. Let's see, we also heard a lot in the community conversation about community-oriented events. And we just wanted to note that our Airport Day, our 1940s ball, and Young Eagles, we're in the process of working through all these things, as well as also communicating them in Spanish. And I want to say that Eric as well comes from an airport where special events drew in much of the community and visitors, and we'll use this experience to prepare the airport for all kinds of community-related activities. Regardless of the scenario, we'll keep trying to assure that the airport is a community resource for people. And also, I want to mention electrification. We think that it may be possible for electric charging facilities to be eligible for state funding, and we'll be looking for all opportunities to advance this possibility. One place where electric planes are quite useful is in towing gliders, which if we're able to deploy more of that infrastructure possibly has a positive impact on our noise situation at the airport. And as fully electric airplanes become more prevalent, being an early adopter of electric infrastructure will only aid in the further reduction of low-leaded fuels. And then I'll go to the last slide, please, which is the questions that we pose to the council. Again, thank you for giving us the opportunity to give you some updated information and an opportunity for a further discussion on the airport.
Thank you so much, Blythe and Eric. Really appreciate you guys putting that information in front of us. And Elisha, thanks for putting those questions in the chat. So as you can see, Council, we've got just 2 questions in front of us that staff has proposed. And so certainly like to open up to anybody who has questions based on that presentation. And again, just reminding, like, if we can make sure our questions are in service of answering those 2 questions, that'll help kind of keep us moving along and get us towards providing the direction that staff is seeking from us. So yeah, open for questions. I see Rob, go ahead.
Thanks, Matt. Has staff taken into consideration what moving forward, what not taking funds would do as far as our efforts to keep our scientific research in Boulder and CAR in some of these labs, given our current political landscape?
Thank you for the question, Councilmember Kaplan. I think the question is what is the impact to research labs as it relates to scenario 1 versus scenario 2? Is that the right question?
It is, but more in like we're trying to maintain these research facilities that we have, and I'm just wondering if that was taken into consideration, if any research has been done into that.
That is not, I do not know the answer to that question, and certainly we'll see if Eric or anyone else does, but that's the first I have not done research on that in that regard. Eric, do you know?
Yeah, I can speak to at least one tenant that's at the airport. Neon Battelle, who does ecological research, their current lease is up in 2028. And so they recently asked about the upcoming council meeting. And so there is interest by existing scientific communities at the airport in this topic tonight. But we do not have a detailed analysis about where everybody is in their efforts.
Okay, and my last question, I know that when you've got a piece of property or an investment property, and for example, if you have a 20-year lease, it gives you security that you have an income stream. As that lease compresses into 2 years, then it's just basically the land value. I think we've briefly touched on this, but are you seeing or hearing from current tenants that the uncertainty of the airport may be driving away any economic activity?
Yeah, Eric, would you take that question, please?
Yeah. The answer to the question is yes. Tenants do have concern about the uncertainty of the airport's future. There have been reports of some tenants losing employees due to not being sure if they have a future career at the airport. Out of respect of their privacy, I don't want to name the organization. We do have a vacancy of a hangar, and it's difficult to get filled under the existing conditions of not being able to provide long-term leases. And that one's had a negative impact on our budget. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. And then my last question, Blythe was saying that the FAA entitlement grants are pretty secure. As far as we know, are they operating? I mean, I understand it's independent of the executive branch, but what level of security do we have to keep receiving these grants in the future? I don't know if you can answer that or not, but.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer for that at this time, other than what's been provided by Blythe earlier.
Okay, I know it's a pretty
It's a
mercurial
hard
situation.
question, if I may. It's a hard question to answer because we have seen a dwindling of applicable federal funds across all um, areas of work. We have, however, seen more funds coming in the transportation area than in any others. And in speaking to our federal lobbyists, we believe that we will continue seeing more and more in the transportation sphere. But I by no means want to guarantee that what that could look like as we move forward, as cycles change and folks and funding opportunities may evolve over time.
I appreciate that. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Ryan, go for it.
Thank you. I think I just have one question, and it's actually, Matt, to pick up on your request that we stay in the proper lanes for council tonight. And I have a question to make sure I know where the lanes are. This is probably for Nuria or Teresa. So I think essentially we are being asked to consider providing direction that would implicitly authorize the use of grants, which would have perpetuity covenants. Those would be new as of 2022, as you discussed, and it would be new, post the lawsuit. So this does seem like this is new territory. So my question is, do I have that right? That's sort of, part of our discussion tonight. And if so, can you confirm it would be appropriate for council to be considering our tolerance for perpetuity covenants as part of tonight's discussion?
I'll let Nuri and Teresa answer that question.
Yeah, I'm happy to take a shot at it and see what Nuria has to add. It is accurate that taking new FAA grants come with grant assurances that run into perpetuity. The reason for that is a little bit technical, but boiled down, that is accurate. Is it appropriate for council to consider? It's honestly, it's a very difficult question to answer on the fly. Typically, council does not weigh in on what grant conditions are in a grant and whether we sign off on those or not. That's purely operational. I understand, Ryan, that what you're talking about, though, is the encumbrance of a piece of property in a way that looks different. And my honest answer is, I don't know if that is policy or operational. I've not had an opportunity to research into that.
Okay. Thank you, Teresa. And sorry, did Nuri already go, or did Nuri want to add to that?
Well, no, I appreciate that, right? As we're thinking about it, and appreciate legal's advice as we're moving forward. I'll say we enter into, I guess, a series of other grants like state historic fund grants and that have covenants as well. So it's an interesting question as we enter into any covenant or agreement in furtherance of existing policy.
Okay, thank you. And then just a thing, just to define for the record, Teresa, you're right about the question is about encumbrances of the use of property, but it's also to, I think, the first hot point in Nicole's hotline today. There's also, I believe, requirements that we would need to operate and maintain the use in a way for the airport. So I guess that's the kind of scope of my question. And I think I'm hearing we're not sure. I suppose I'll leave comments on it for the comment period. So, okay, thank you for that. And then I think I have one other question that Rob got me thinking about, and this is probably for Eric or transportation folks. So you talked about the long-term, like uncertainty in long-term, and I'm just wondering, is there evidence, just like in the industry, if you look around, that there is something that that is considered a sufficiently long-term commitment to to create certainty that is not just forever, right? That's not eternity, right? Is there some term in the industry that would fit that bill, but that's short of eternity?
Yeah. I'll start with a little bit of historical context. The FAA has guidance on lease terms, and historically speaking, there used to be a 99-year cap, and at some point during the last 20 or 30 years, I don't know exactly when, they updated that guidance to 50 years. So there is a 50-year cap based on current rules and regulations. The typical setup is about 20 years for agreements, but there you can have any iteration of lease terms that you want. You can do 5-year with 5-year options going all the way up to 25 years or up to the 50 years. It's just all negotiating points.
Cool. Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Mark, you're up.
Okay. I have a couple of questions regarding the information we've been given. Did we do any analysis of the potential impact of Sundance in terms of our ability to have additional revenues to what we have today? Or B, did we project out on the possibility that the economy will actually recover, providing additional revenues for the operation of the airport? That's my first question.
I'm happy maybe to jump in on the Sundance question and let others do it. But I will say that we don't know yet, right, as what financial the extent to which we will benefit financially. We know that we will see hopefully a bump in sales tax as we move forward with the Sundance Film Festival. In speaking to them, we do not anticipate and understanding their current operations and guest, we do not anticipate immediately that our airport will come into play.
Okay.
May I add to that?
Certainly.
It's generally understood that a lot of the traffic that would be flying in are either going to be coming in via airline or through jets, and a very, very limited number of jets can actually come in to Boulder Municipal Airport. But it is entirely possible for folks to taxi from any airports that they would fly into, such as Centennial or Rocky Mountain Metro, into Boulder. So I do think that there is some planning that's needed for that.
Okay. We just recently had a housing development completed at the edge of what had been the airport property. In terms of raising money for needed maintenance, did we look at the possibility of carving out a piece of property at the edge of the airport and selling it for that purpose?
Yes, I could speak to that. There's a 2.3 acre piece of property that is in the master plan that was identified as a potential release, and that property was released and converted to residential. Today it's known as Abello condos, and the existing master plan does not identify any other parcels for potential release such as that one. But I do think that that's something that can be evaluated as a part of the next master plan update.
If we're looking between the couch cushions for money, that seems to be an obvious place to look for money. I want to point out that in every iteration of expense factors, whether it's the gap in funding or remediation for environmental cleanup, the numbers seem to get larger. And while that may be in service to a particular argument, I'm just not sure that it's fully justified. And I don't see a lot of background and supporting evidence for those representations. I see what you're doing with respect to the environmental remediation, but I don't see a lot of support for those numbers, and I'd like to see more.
Mark, is there a question with that, or is that more of
Yes,
a
could I see more information
Okay.
concerning issues of that type? I mean, if you want me to put a question mark on it, I'm happy to do so. Lastly, we've had extensive community conversation and otherwise with respect to the impact of lead in the air. And did we look at all at the composition of the population, so let's say within a half a mile of the airport, in terms of the overrepresentation of Latino population in that exposure to lead?
If I'm thanks for the question, Councilmember Wallach. I think if I'm understanding the question correctly, we were very intentional and deliberate about how we engaged with the communities that were closest to the airport, and cited some of that in the information that we provided. We've not done any specific testing as it relates to those populations, at least not through our efforts in the city of Boulder. Does that answer your question?
Yes. All right, I'll save the bulk of my comments for answering the second question. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Tara, you're up.
Hi. I don't know if I'm going to make it much longer than this with this migraine, but I was waiting to ask this one question. So I don't like the noise from the airport. I dislike it, especially today with this headache is so bad. No, in all seriousness, my most important thing is that this airport does not get bigger, that more planes don't come, that we don't have more noise, because especially after reading the packet, which by the way, I thought was really great. Thanks for the people who wrote it. So there was a fair amount of information on the Rocky Mountain Metro and how it's gotten a lot larger, not been able to control it. The people are very upset in the neighborhoods there. And I do not want that to happen here. So if I was to pick whether scenario A or scenario B, can either one of them make sure that this airport doesn't get larger, we don't have more runways, we don't have more traffic, or did neither one of those have to do with this?
I can speak to the land piece. As far as expansion of the airport as it sits today, we've got a lake on one side and a cliff on the other. And then we've got residents just to the north, and then a jail complex to the south. So with terms to expansion and land-wise, it's not foreseeable that the airport would be expanding.
Nor the runways then?
It would be very expensive to extend the runway due to the nature of grading and filling in to make that possible.
All right, Tara, was that good for you? Awesome. Sweet. Thank you. Tina, you're up.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Loud and clear.
Okay, my video is not working, and just thank you to Chris Muschuk, who has tried to troubleshoot virtually, but we are not successful today. So thanks anyway. So just following up with Tara's question, I appreciate that the land configuration can't change. Would we anticipate more takeoffs and touchdowns in the coming years that might contribute to noise?
Please.
Yeah, I'll
Eric.
take this one.
Yeah.
Typically through the master planning process, they do forecasting, and due to the age of our master plan, I don't have an accurate picture of what the next 15 years will carry, so I can't speak to that.
Okay, and I was just basing it off the Daily Camera article I read, that they just said that air traffic is generally picking up in the region, and I wasn't sure if we'd be part of that as well. So trying to, okay, so and my other question is, we do talk about the importance of supporting our science community and emergency services. About how much of the airport activity is specifically from science coming from NCAR, as Rob importantly brought up, and also for emergency operations?
I am not prepared with that information, but we do have an airport monitoring system that I can pull the report and get those to you tomorrow.
Okay, is it like half and half, or is it a small portion? Do we know, or?
I do not.
Okay, okay, yeah, no problem. And I should have sent that out in advance. That's on me. Okay. So one question is, we're looking at the perpetuity piece, whether it's true today or not, but we would certainly be confirming it if we move forward. Would we be, so we have to operate the airport into perpetuity, and we may not get grants. And if we don't get a grant, but the FAA requires us to operate the airport, thereby using more of our local taxpayer funds to subsidize the airport, do we have any ability to to then sue or otherwise go after the FAA for repairs? Because they're putting us in a funny position where if they decline the federal grants, the city of Boulder needs to pay for what's more or less a regional utility. So is there anything we have in that scenario?
So I think what you're asking is, would there be a cause of action to recover funds invested into the airport? And I don't believe that that would be a fruitful avenue, because it is frankly a choice, and council can make the choice. And the FAA has made clear what their position is, which is that airports, all airports, including our airport, have to continue to operate as airports once they have been funded by federal dollars. We can always ask to decommission the airport, and you can do that in a variety of circumstances. Those are not granted lightly and not granted often.
Okay. And then do we have minimum things that we have to fund for safety? So I mean, how low could we go in case we don't win grants, yet we still need to operate the airport? And again, I mean, it's the taxpayer general fund that's going to go here.
Yeah. So the FAA has preemptive authority over airports. So they get to tell us what we have to do, whether we're accepting their money or not. By opening an airport, we agreed to abide by federal rules. And so we do have obligations, certainly for safety, but they go well beyond safety to maintenance and operation. And those obligations remain, whether we're accepting grants or not.
Tina, does that end your line of inquiries? Tina, can you hear us? All right, I'm going to assume it does, but if you have one, text me, ping me in the chat or something. Let me know if you got another question. We'll get back to you. But in the meantime, let's move over to Taisha and go for it.
Thank you. I just have a couple quickies. One on just confirming that if we decommission the airport, the airspace then could be sold, and the noise and the lead spray would continue, correct?
I can speak to this.
But only 20% of the lead. because 80% goes on takeoff and, right? I
I'm
look for
not familiar with percentages of
Okay.
combustion and lead, but I can speak to the airspace. So the airspace being federally regulated is not something that's for sale, but in the instance of the new flight patterns that the FAA put into place at Rocky Mountain Metro, the reality is, if the airport goes away, that space would be filled up then by Rocky Mountain Metro's traffic. And the reality is we were able to use the justification of the airport here in Boulder to turn that traffic away from the Boulder stacks in East Boulder.
Okay. And then I saw the EV stations, but I was curious if there were any um, conversations going on right now regarding energy development. It was something we discussed last time we had this conversation in 2003 as a possible revenue generator and how much that could bring in.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Adams, would you repeat the question, please?
I was asking, I noticed the EV and I appreciated the stations, and I was curious if there were conversations or considerations of possible revenue streams from potential renewable energy generation like solar on site.
That's what I'm sorry. That's what I thought your question was. We've not done any studies, but I think certainly if there's a difference between the two scenarios fundamentally as it relates to the certainty of the future in one versus the other not. And so certainly in the one where there is more certainty of future, we would be better positioned to more aggressively develop land, and certainly renewable energy would be one use that we could consider, and we're open to that. We haven't done any specific studies on it, though.
And I'm just asking, and you weren't not here when we had that conversation the last time, so this isn't, and it certainly is not meant to be, and I gotcha. But when the group that was trying to turn that into a neighborhood, or sprawl into a neighborhood, I asked about whether or not renewable energy could potentially be sited regardless of whether it remained at an airport or not, and was told that there are current cases where airports are siting renewables and generating revenue and income on that. And so that is what I'm asking about. I noticed it wasn't included in the thing, but so when we're talking about revenue streams, it seems like that would potentially be one.
Taisha, I can take that. There are cases as close as Erie where they have a solar site near the airport. It would have to go through a glare study with the FAA.
But there is precedence.
Yes, there is precedence.
And do we know how much they're generating from that?
I do not know the specifics of their deal there. I do also want to call attention to Denver International Airport. They have a very massive solar farm there.
Okay.
So the amount of land and the type of terrain you have are potential limiting factors. So the cliff on the one side doesn't really help us in that sense, but it is something that is an available avenue. And I've by happenstance, I had to go through that process in the airport that I was managing in Illinois, because the municipality was the utility provider. Power, water, electric, or power and electric, same thing. And so we did get from start to finish, a solar project approved on city property adjacent to the airport.
Thank you very much. That's the end of my questions.
Thank you so much, Taisha. Appreciate that. Nicole, you're up.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. One was, it sounded like our approach to community concerns about lead pollution was basically giving the airport neighbors a flyer that says, wash your hands, take off your shoes, get a HEPA filter, and maybe get a blood test. Is that because we don't really have any authority to do anything else?
I certainly welcome Eric to supplement Nicole, but I think that's right. We can't regulate, certainly can't regulate the fuel use of planes that are already in the airspace. What we can do is again, once the regulatory approvals from the feds are complete, we can transition to unleaded, which would not prevent entirely planes in our airspace using leaded fuel, but it would at least eliminate the possibility that they could buy it from us. But at the time, I think that's pretty much what we were limited to do, was just provide as much information as we could so that community members would know as much as they needed to know to try to keep themselves safe.
To build on that, we wanted to provide objective information, and we use that state resource and county resources to do so, because we don't have that expertise in-house.
Yeah, is there any financial support available for people living near the airport who have lead concerns, like to pay for a blood test? That they're not always cheap. And if you don't have insurance, it's not easy, right? I just wonder, even like a HEPA filter or something like that. I'm just wondering, is there any possibility of any support for folks?
I believe that folks that are on government subsidies are eligible for free lead testing. And I think that is in the lead materials that were passed out as a part of the hotline response.
Yeah, but not for like getting a HEPA filter or anything like that. The other
I'm not sure or aware of a program like that.
I was also wondering, I didn't quite understand the answer to Tara's question, but it sounded like there may be a possibility of developing more of the airport's land for operations in the coming decades if it stays an airport, like building more larger hangars or runways. Did I understand that right, or did I get it wrong?
We do have in our plans, again, from the 2024 study, some additional development of hangar space on the property.
Okay, and could the FAA tell us that we have to expand things or make runways larger or anything like that?
Yeah, I
Or
was
more hangars?
lean on Eric, see him shaking his head no.
No, they rely on the airport to lead the master planning process and take community input on that kind of planning. And so they do not take authority in how an airport gets developed. They just participate as funders and regulators.
Okay, thank you. And then just one last question. This follows up on Ryan's question. So probably Nuria, Teresa, somebody else may know this one. What are the approximate sizes of the properties in situations where we've taken funding that has put permanent encumbrances on city-owned land and the buildings and facilities on it? Just approximate ballpark.
Conservation easements are quite large. And those are permanent encumbrances. Again, I don't know that we've had the chance to look into it, but certainly water sources where there are conservation covenants. There are smaller things, of course, as well. From small parcels to many acres. And, things come to mind like open space, where open space is property bought with open space dollars has to remain for open space purposes. And those are very specific purposes.
Yeah, but those are our encumbrances, right? Not the federal government's or.
The open spaces, but the conservation easements and things are, I believe, mostly on the state level.
Okay, thank you.
Is that all, Nicole? Awesome, thank you. Tara, double dip.
Sorry.
All good.
Two questions following up with Nicole. And I don't know much about airports, obviously, except that I go to them. But besides that, would more hangars necessarily mean more flights then?
Eric, can you take that?
Yeah, the airport has a hangar wait list, and that wait list is almost 400 people long. And those are individuals that are seeking space. So naturally, as you add an extra plane to be based there, there will be added activity. But I do want to note that, that these are not flight schools that are on the wait list. These are individuals that live in the community and in the county.
Okay, and this is the real question I had this, and that was, we had this ballot measure and then we stopped it because we brought that suit to the, right? Can we, but I feel like the people still might want to do a ballot measure. So my question is, and forgive me for not knowing the answer to this, but I couldn't read anything today. If so it was answered today, I couldn't read it. Can you decommission an airport if you take, does it matter if you take the funds or not, whether or not you can go ahead and try to decommission your airport? So in other words, does scenario A or B affect whether or not you can decommission an airport? That might be an easy answer, so I don't.
It's actually a little bit complicated, but certainly grant assurances are a factor in that will be considered in a request to decommission. I do want to reiterate that it is the FAA's current position that we are already encumbered into perpetuity.
And perhaps Teresa adding, I just want to clarify, we did not stop a petition as that moved forward. And I think
I realize that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if it sounded like I said that.
All good. And then the choice or the request to decommission could happen now, or it could happen in the future, whether or not we take federal funding. So that's a request that has to happen no matter what, because of our current position with the FAA.
All right, is that it, Tara? All right, being sensitive to time, also, we've been at this for about an hour. We've sort of got to give, roughly an hour and a half for this, and then about the same for our next subject. Although, we can kind of do as we please on that front, should we need to. But with that being said, I do have one question, then we can get to our next question, which is, I think, where some of the meat and potatoes really gets with this, but these are some good questions. Mine just comes down to pavement reconstruction. I know on the slide we talked about that if we do pursue scenario 1, that we would have a pavement reconstruction probably in the 2029 timeframe that I saw, but I'm wondering, would we be able to avoid pavement reconstruction and meet our existing grant assurances through 2040? Are we able to sort of just patchwork our way all the way through that? Or do we actually, or does that have to actually come into play? I'm just worried that have we gamed it out that we might be perhaps coming close to violating our obligations if we don't do a pavement reconstruction between now and 2040?
I can take that question. So the state does pavement condition index reporting every few years, and our runway and taxiway rate pretty highly because they were recently done in as recently as 2020. And the maintenance that we're doing this year with the CDOT grant money that we got is going to extend the life of those pavements. However, with the reprogrammed money for ramp reconstruction and right around the time of the community conversation, we had to take maintenance into our own hands. And we didn't do it to the extent that we could have had we had access to those grant dollars. And so the patches that were performed on the ramp throughout the entirety are reaching about a year and a half since they've been seal coated or crack sealed. That's why you saw pictures of me and my team out there crack sealing to try and catch up with some of that maintenance. But the cracks are now, where the cracks had previously been filled, the cracks are now appearing on the sides of the repairs. And so reconstruction is one that is in the near term, in the next 3 or 4 years. and one that I anticipate in either scenario. We do have a section of ramp pavement as of the last pavement condition index that ranked 26 out of a 100 scale. And when it gets that low, it becomes a lot more expensive to replace.
Okay, I hear what you're saying. I was just because I think what was discussed in the slide was that large pavement reconstruction cost was not factored in to scenario 2. And so what I may be hearing is maybe it will be at some point.
Yeah, so that's a really good point. Thank you for asking that question. So a part of the June 24 financial analysis, there was also a long-term capital plan report that was produced. And in the report, there was an assumption made that in scenario 2, you don't do the full pavement reconstruction. You just do the crack seals and seal coats. And they had that every 5 years. But it did note in that long-term capital plan under scenario 2 that if pavement conditions reach poor enough condition, there would need to be a replacement cost factored into that was not factored in under scenario 2 per the June 24 analysis.
Okay, I appreciate that. So it's fair to say that by this, if we're lucky, we can avoid that, but there is a decent chance that we would have to factor in a significant capital investment where we're covering that cost ourselves to do a significant pavement reconstruction that we didn't plan for should the pavement conditions go worse than maybe we're crossing our fingers to achieve.
It is possible, yes.
Okay, all right, I appreciate that. Okay, that was my last one. I was hoping to move to the next question, but I see Tina, and look, she's got her camera working, so she's ready to go. But I know she got cut off, so she may have had an extra question before she lost internet. So Tina, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I finally figured another option out. So I did have one question. I realized that how we use and accept federal grants is largely operational. But I'm wondering what the process is to make sure that any assurances related to a grant or conditions are in alignment with our general community values, our basic mission and beliefs. And if there is a conflict, how is there a centralized point in the city that ensures that the conditions that we're accepting do align with our values? And how does council get a heads up if there's a perceived conflict?
Teresa, do you want me to go or you go?
I don't mind starting. Thanks for the question. The city manager implements the council's policy daily. And one of the ways the city manager does that is by making sure that all of the city's contracts, including grants and grant assurances and grant conditions, align with city council policy. So an excellent example is that the council adopted a racial equity plan. So we do not sign grants that differ from that plan. There has not been a stated policy with respect to encumbrances on property. I was able to get a little more information. There are federal land and water grants like the one we took for Sanitas that has permanent encumbrances. To my knowledge, there is no policy currently about encumbrances on city properties or encumbrances that the city places on other properties. Is that a proper topic for council to develop a policy on? Perhaps. But I guess how do you know that the city manager is acting in compliance with your stated policy and direction? I think that there is some level of understanding that the city manager acts at the direction of city council. In addition, all of these documents are public. You're certainly welcome to see them at any time that you'd like to. And I'm sure that if you had questions, we'd be happy to answer those questions on a case-by-case basis as well.
And the grants would go through the city office. They're not done in the individual departments.
So I was just going to add
that. There's a huge process.
Yeah. There is a process for that. We have centralized, I've been moving to centralize, and most of our grants now go through our grants manager. Anything that is impacted by federal orders, new, existing or new, go through review with our city attorney's office. And we have a process and a procedure to make sure that none of what we are signing goes counter to the city's values and council's direct priorities. We have been doing that for a while now, and every grant, whether it has been modular homes or DOLA grants, housing grants, this would be no different, goes through the same process.
Okay, and so for like, so, you know, the new assurance that you need to provide the 100 leaded octane fuel, even though that might be contrary to some of our health goals for the community, but we don't really have a policy about clean air from airports or anything like that, right?
I think we have an advocacy position to continue to move forward and look for more sustainable ways in which to provide all our services. And I will say that the FAA, and correct me because now I'm speaking over muskies. So Eric and Blythe will correct me if I'm wrong. But the FAA, as they are moving towards lead-free aviation, as they call it, do not prohibit us from pursuing that. What they currently disallow is for the city to restrict leaded fuel until they have sufficient guarantees that there is enough to go around, and they have put something in place that we certainly cannot restrict leaded fuels in its current capacity at the earliest before December 31st, 2030. But after that, we are free to continue to expand, whether it's unleaded, or in fact, we are continuing to think about electric aviation as well. So.
And to build on that, Nuria, if council's priority
if
was,
I've gotten that wrong, don't just build, Eric, but correct me.
no, you've got it spot on. Just to build on that, if it is a priority of council to further incentivize those kinds of measures, there's nothing in the current state legislature that restricts us from adding to the fuel subsidy to make it even more attractive.
Okay. And then my last question is just a technical one, and I'm positive I know the answer, but by accepting grants into perpetuity, we're also obligating city councils into perpetuity for devoting probably some of taxpayer funds to the airport. And this wouldn't qualify. We try not to dedicate or restrict future councils' budgeting, but in this case, that wouldn't be the same. Is that right?
I think that is right. The code currently provides for an airport.
Okay.
Providing for an airport in this community made us subject to a variety of conditions through the FAA. And so I think that binding happened a long time ago in some ways, right? And so that's not to say that this wouldn't be additional or different, but I think it's important that we don't get confused between the fact of having an airport and the FAA's control that they have and what comes of grant assurances, because it's not just the grant assurances that bind the city.
Okay. All right. I'm good. Thanks.
Thanks, Tina. All right. Well, great questions for everybody. Really appreciate all that. And thank you, staff, for answering everybody's questions, even some of those that were quite technical and difficult. Again, Blythe, Eric, thank you so much for answering those. Now we're going to get to sort of the meat and potatoes of this the second question here. Does council have feedback to support scenario 1 or scenario 2? Remembering that scenario 1 is direction to say, look, we're interested in maintaining this airport indefinitely. And then option 2 is sort of maintaining our window and door foreclosure. For the sake of brevity, let's hopefully not have long opining statements and really just get to where you're leaning here real quick. And I think the best thing for us to do is to have a straw poll here towards the very end, and that'll give staff very good clarity in terms of who supports scenario 1 of maintaining the airport indefinitely and who supports scenario 2, or I wouldn't say supports, expresses interest and preference towards scenario 2. So let's just quick comments if we can, and then we'll get to the straw poll, and then hopefully we can give staff some clear direction here. So with that in mind, Ryan, take it away.
Okay, first, thanks to staff, especially Eric and Nuri and Teresa, for spending a lot of time with me the last couple of weeks. So summary, I think we should continue to operate the airport. We should do that with the kind of real long-term planning and commitment that we do with any other large public facility, many of which we're working on now. But I think we should, for now, avoid taking the extraordinary measure of locking out, essentially some of these rights we've talked about that a perpetual agreement would encumber us with. And if we're really gonna do that, we should make sure there's no other realistic options. So just a few more things to say on this. So I think there's really 2 issues. The first issue is, do we continue the airport? And this is explicitly the question in the airport community conversation that we've gone through. This is the question before us. Personally, I would rather us be ending this in a more formal meeting with the hearing. But in any case, in advance of that, I'm ready to say that my direction is we should continue with the airport. Part of the reasoning is that we have just significant operations costs that we're on the hook for, and also there's a possibility of a negative judgment in 2040 or whenever that we go for it, that we're just going to have even significantly more money we're going to have to be responsible for. But there is a second issue, which is, do we authorize significant perpetual financial and land use covenants that the community is bound to forever? And whatever we do, I think we need to give clear direction to staff on this. We need to come away from this meeting, or come away from, in the very near future, a sense that we're all clear on what the direction we're giving is. So I do think it's appropriate for this council to make a sufficient long-term commitment. And we need to eliminate the uncertainty for investors. There's no question about that. But we have a process for making long-term plans. The way we do that conventionally is looking in 20-year increments with the BVCP. So I would suggest that we do that now. There is a big difference between that and forever, which is a perpetuity agreement. There are small perpetuity agreements we've heard about, but this is a very big perpetuity agreement that is not only the rights to use land, but the operating costs. There's just a few reasons. I'll say them and then I'll come down that I think need to be clear. One, we don't have a super good policy to govern this kind of a decision. I think it's clear that this is a little bit of a singular issue. If we go forward with this, I think it raises the question, well, what if somebody says you can have $20 million for a rec center, but you got to make a pickleball cart in perpetuity? Or what if, we'll give you 15 million for open space, but I want a private trail? I think this does open a question about how do we deal with significant perpetuity contracts. Another thing is that if we are we're ostensibly making a decision on the community conversation. I don't think the community conversation dealt with this specific perpetuity issue. I just don't think we've really taken this on. There are, thirdly, a number of practical financial considerations that have not been answered. What will this really cost us? We have not done something like a perpetuity issues assessment. I think that's called for here. And then the final thing is, we have these ballot measure organizers who stood down while we went through this legal proceeding in good faith. As far as I know, we have not closed the loop with them, and my understanding is the first they've heard about our plan to decide this was when they heard about the study session. So, in sum, I think this perpetuity matter is something we should decide in a principled way. I think it's a little premature. It is premature to decide that at this moment. But having said all of that, I do think we should support the long-term use of the airport, and we should do that with thought to our normal conventions. And I'm open to, if it's more than 20 years, let's talk about that. Yeah, so I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. We'll come back to a straw poll and we'll see where that vote resides, or that preference resides, I should say. Mark, go for it.
Thank you. I do have a few comments. The first is, for a decision this consequential, I cannot believe we're using a straw poll at a study session for guidance. This really requires community input. It requires a hearing. This is a piece of property worth hundreds of millions of dollars, and we're doing this in a study session. Forgive me, that seems entirely inappropriate. Second, continued operation of the airport without grants is temporary and can be changed. Applying for the FAA grants is permanent and forever. And I think that would be a huge mistake on the part of this city. I agree with my colleague Ryan that what we're doing with respect to the 3,400 people who signed an initiative and now will not only not have that initiative be judged by the community, but they will never be able to do an initiative of that like again. And I think that is entirely inappropriate. Finally, in terms of what we have been presented tonight, I think it has been more of a brief for taking FAA money than what I would have regarded as a more even-handed presentation of the various positions. We have highly speculative environmental remediation figures without much support. We have an estimated statement of value that is barely $1 million per acre of value. I invite anyone attending this meeting to go into Boulder and attempt to buy an acre of land of the prime quality that this is for $1 million. That's not going to happen. There was very little analysis of alternative funding mechanisms or funding sources. And so for all of these reasons, I encourage us to take steps that will not bind us in perpetuity. We can revisit this at any time of our choosing. We can see what the facts are and how it's playing out. And at that time, we can come to a different decision. But doing so tonight via a study session is frankly the height of hubris, and we ought not to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Rob, you're up.
Thanks, Matt. And I appreciate both my colleagues' comments. I'm a big fan of home rule with Senate Bill 101 and the lot splitting. That takes power away from us. And I do want to acknowledge the people that signed that petition in wanting to keep the land with Boulder. I understand it. On the other side, I also understand the financial responsibility that we have as council members looking to the future. And, to Mark's point, there is a lot of ambiguity on these numbers, and there always is. In my experience, when we're talking about cost, the numbers always go up. Maybe not in this case, I don't know, but I'm looking at $9 million over 14 years. And some people will say that's not a lot of money, but just last year, the director of Parks and Rec had to close Spruce Pool early just to save $20,000. And I don't want to compromise things like the South Boulder Rec Center and our streets and some of the other things. This money will come out of the general fund, and it will affect our city. Based on some of the conversations I had, if we don't take the funds and we went $9 million for 14 years, in today's net value, we'd be about $300,000 in litigation. Santa Monica's litigation to close that airport when they were fighting with the FAA took over a decade. So that 300,000 is probably very low. And from all the research that I've done, there's about a 35 to 45% chance of us even winning that suit. I don't want to put this city into a precarious financial situation. We just had our facilities meeting. We're looking at numbers that are $400 million. I don't think that responsibly looking into the future, we can encumber our general fund even more when we're currently looking at ballot measures to try to bring in more money. I think there could be value. I mean, there could be climate research, aviation, campus. To Taisha's point, It could also incorporate solar farms, clear aviation test beds. I'm sorry, clean aviation test beds. There's a lot of things. We've got research centers here that would use it. Right now, as the time compresses, enterprises, nobody likes the uncertainty. They will leave, and we will have basically a brown field. But I think that if we do straw poll and we do decide to keep this, there is a potential for us to put energy and time and attract all the kinds of enterprises that we want in Boulder, with specifically with research. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. I appreciate that. Mayor Brockett, go for it.
Thanks, Matt. And thanks, city staff, for all your analysis and the detailed answers to the questions that came out this afternoon. And Eric, it's really good to have you on board. You're doing extraordinary work. So thanks for being on the team and moving things forward. So my analysis on this comes down pretty similarly to what Rob just said. You know, I've been really intrigued by the possibility of the airport repurposing, and I've certainly followed that along with great interest over the last few years to see what the potential might be. And you know, we had that community conversation and the different scenarios, and so I supported us filing the lawsuit when we did, so that we could try to get an answer to the question of whether we might be able to close the airport. And the courts sent us back and said, come back in 2040. So then I've been thinking about what might that look like. And so as I understand it, that potential path to closure would involve waiting until 2040, then filing a lawsuit. And then that would take, you know, my guess would be 5 years to 10 years. And then we would find out at that point, having already spent many millions of dollars out of the general transportation fund and some amount of dollars in the legal arena, and then it might well come to nothing. In the meantime, the airport will be gradually deteriorating, the deferred maintenance will be piling up. And so my concern is that we're putting an important city facility at real risk here to be kind of essentially gradually degrade over a course of 20 to 25 years for what may well end up being a decision that we would have to keep operating it in perpetuity, and then we'd have to kick in even more funds to then take that back up at that time. So I just see from a fiduciary responsibility to the city perspective that I think it's the responsible thing for us to do at this point is to commit to the indefinite operation of the airport. I wish we had other options that were in between indefinitely and waiting for 25 plus years. But the choice in front of us is what we have. So I do feel like it's time to go ahead and say that we're operating the airport indefinitely, and then make it the very best possible airport, both in the sense of functionality and catching up on maintenance, but also in the sense of mitigating any problems to the community, like with moving away from leaded fuel as quickly as possible and doing all the other mitigation methods that Eric is now working really hard on. And just all that is in the framework of our decreasing spending power and increasing backlog of needs that we need to attend to in the meantime. So that's where I land. Appreciate everybody's thoughts on this.
Thank you, Aaron. Nicole, you're up.
Thank you. Well, thanks, first of all, staff, for the presentation, discussion, all of this tonight. I agree with Mark, as I often do on financial issues. I'd like us to continue operating the airport, and I can't support a decision that adds perpetual federal obligations right now. So if those two things can't be disconnected and we have to make this decision tonight, I can't support scenario one, which leaves me with no alternative but scenario two. I do have unresolved concerns about the financial commitments we're taking on and handing to every future council, as well as the flexibility we may lose and the willingness of the federal government to partner with us in perpetuity. Not to mention massively violating the expectations of thousands of community members when they withdrew their petition, and the expectations of the community that they'll be included in major land use decisions. If scenario one is framed as a decision to commit future generations to the perpetual use of this land in the same way it's used in 2026, I can't say yes to it tonight. I really don't mind being wrong. I sincerely hope that I am, and my lack of faith in the federal government proves unfounded. But I won't be supporting scenario 1 tonight.
Thank you, Nicole. Tara.
I agree with everybody. It's true. We don't have the money. We're still gonna have noise, even if we have an airport or not. Thank you, Taish, for that point. For the most part, our airport can't get larger, really. And in some ways, our airport stops or limits the flight patterns coming in from Rocky Mountain Metro. Also, I agree with everybody that said that we should have a public hearing, and a study session / straw poll is not the way to go forward. I'm happy with the straw poll, but I don't want it to be the final decision maker. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Tara. Well, we'll get to that straw poll in just a minute. Taisha, you're up.
Yes, thank you so much. Again, thank you to the staff. And for all of those who participated in the very extensive 2023 conversations. Also just wanted to lift up, I've gotten some feedback from or read some emails and things from community members about, the level of democracy and, we didn't talk about these things. And I just want to reiterate that there was a whole airport forum, and what I'm about to say is very similar to what I said then. And if anything, my position has deepened because of the poly crisis that we're in right now. So I'll just start with the perpetuity conversation, and to say that the line of thinking that you're currently using would mean that me and my African American ancestors would be 3/5 a person still. Our government changes. It's disingenuous to act like it doesn't. And especially with our current administration, there will be several things, areas that we will have to reconstruct because of the deconstruction that has happened across so many federal agencies, including transportation. The second is around the environmental components. And again, we had 3 drops of snow this year, and I continue to believe our climate scientists who have been very clear on the escalation and expansion of emergency and disaster response. And so I do believe we're going to continue to need that area, and we need it to be functioning. We need the roads to be functional for emergency and disaster response. I'm still devastated about the FAA's oversight as it relates to both the noise and lead transition. However, it is my understanding, based on the staff's response, that these 2 issues would not be resolved regardless of if we went with scenario 1 or scenario 2. Regarding grant status, I would argue that the question that my colleague raised is applicable to every federal grant that we are accepting. And so I don't know. I mean, I don't know what to say. That to me is not in sufficient enough to not accept the money. And if anything, because we are not getting the grant amounts that we were getting in some of the other areas, particularly around health and human services, et cetera, which are now going to lean even more heavily on our general fund, that will be absolutely critical, which then takes us to our fiduciary responsibility. I would agree that the numbers that were provided I actually would say that considering the status of the Strait of Hormuz and the status of the petrodollar and the status of our global ecological challenges that we know are going to exacerbate our finances at every single level, that those numbers are too low, including that for mitigation. And so it's going to lean more heavily on our general fund. The numbers that we received were about the entire fund, but it's important for us to be reminded that the majority of our fund, our budget, is restricted or dedicated. And so it's actually an even higher percentage that is going to be used out of our general fund. And those are things that could be used for an Elevate Boulder program, which we couldn't afford. The Community Connector program currently does not have sustained funding. And of course, we know the need for South Boulder Rec Center and other deferred maintenance and things that need to happen there. And then lastly, I just wanted to follow up on the airport effort and remind folks, one, I appreciate the 3,000 plus people that signed that petition, which actually only represents 1% of our registered voters. But it also, it was my understanding and my memory that the reason that was pulled was to see how the legal matter would play out, and we have the answer to that legal battle. And so let's see, I think that's all I have on this. Oh, I did have this last thing around study sessions, and I do agree with my colleagues around how this particular decision is made. And I would also argue how our study sessions are being used. This is supposed to be a place where we're getting information. I'm noticing we're getting longer and longer hotlines, 11-page responses from staff. And my question to my fellow council members, because we are a self-governing body, but also from our team, oftentimes we have to use a not of 3 or a not of 5 if our questions are going to take it sufficient staff time to research. And, if Ryan, you have 9, Mark, you have 6, Rob, you have 3, Matt, you have 5. Tara, exactly. Tara, you have 3. No, I don't see it. You don't use that. I like that, but it was funny. Anyway, my larger point is if we calculated all that time together, would that be similar to the kinds of asks that we would have for, a research question? I'm fine with having my fellow council members ask staff for additional questions they have after receiving the packet, but I do have concerns around an expectation that staff is going to send these detailed responses when honestly, it could be a 5-minute conversation during a study session. So thank you. Sorry. And for all of those reasons, I will be supporting option 1.
Great. Thanks, Taisha. I appreciate that. Tina, let's go for it.
Hi. All right. Yeah, thank you for all the discussion, and I appreciate all the perspectives of my colleagues today. And first of all, I'll just join the chorus in saying that I don't think a study session is appropriate for making what I think is a decision, not a direction. And just a reminder that in this format, we've established that this can't be relitigated. And so it is a big deal, and it did not allow for community voice. That being said, we have heard from the community through the community forum and through emails. And I do think we have a good sense of the different considerations that the community is thinking about. And I am, I'm still at a little bit of a crossroads. This has been a really difficult conversation about what to do. I fully support the airport, but I don't like the way the federal grants are structured. So I think for me, I would have liked an option to have had a real discussion about what we might want to see alongside a commitment to keeping the airport open. So some things I would like to see would be a clear policy on how we understand when federal grants might be coming in conflict with our community's values. As Teresa said, that could be a policy, and I think we should pursue that conversation so that we understand what's going on with all of our federal grants. It doesn't mean we have to monitor it, and it doesn't mean we don't have trust in our city manager. It just makes sure that we're aware of the different types of conditions and assurances that are being requested of our city and how they might be in conflict with our community. I also would like us to see a much more aggressive legislative platform on the congressional and senatorial levels to advocate for changes in some of these rulings that have been made, in particular around fuel, around pollution, and possibly, as Nicole was mentioning, are there ways that the federal government can subsidize impacted communities by aviation, especially when cities have little control? To Taisha's point, we don't have any tools for the next 14 years to help with noise or lead. So I think the best we can do is really strengthen our advocacy and hope for a climate where people will listen so that the communities can be protected. The other piece is I would have liked to have said, let's think about this in terms of having a more transparent dashboard around the impacts of the community by noise and by the schedules that pilots might be using. One of the things that's been the most troubling about this conversation is the incredible tension between the aviation community and the community surrounding them. And I would have liked to have seen us go through a process where we can find some mutual respect and understanding. So it's not just this constant, this constant friction. all that being said, I do agree that I think conditions will change. And I am going to end up going with scenario one if I vote at all. And I think this is a vote. I don't think this is a straw poll. So I think I'm just struggling on that piece so deeply. But that's all I've got to say. Thanks.
Thank you. I'd like to weigh in, but I see two more hands up. It's got to be lightning quick because we're already a bit behind. So super quick. Tara, it's got to be lightning quick.
Lightning quick. I just want to agree that council colleagues, I'm asking us to read the little booklet we have, the council handbook, and reconsider how long our hotlines are. I'm just asking for everybody. It's just taking too much time. That's
That
it.
could be a separate conversation and a
Done.
separate piece. It doesn't need to be here on this issue, but I appreciate the thought. Aaron, go for it.
So Matt, I just wanted to ask a process question of Teresa and Nuria, which is, I know we've heard several people having concerns about talking about this only or having a type of direction only at a study session. And what I'm wondering is, could we, whatever direction that we get, would it be possible to formalize that direction with a resolution of some kind? Perhaps that we could vote on, that maybe it's on a consent agenda, like just so that whatever direction that we're giving, could we formalize that with something that's more on the record?
Thanks for that question, Aaron. Indeed, part of council's charge during a study session is to identify action items that they would like staff to bring back. So this is your opportunity to identify action items that you would like staff to bring back. Just because staff didn't prompt you to do so doesn't mean that that's not the case.
Okay, thanks for that.
So I would note that currently there is an ordinance that provides for an airport. And so that direction has already been given. Should you all decide a different direction, formal action would need to be taken for that.
Can we clarify that, Teresa? So you're saying that if scenario one is pursued, no formal action is needed as if it is because it's already baked into an existing ordinance. But if scenario two were to be given guidance tonight, then yes, formal direction would need to be given in order to make that change at a local level via ordinance.
That's correct.
Okay.
Council could direct staff to bring an action item to affirm their decision tonight. That's certainly a possibility. It's not necessary, but it's a possibility.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, let's take these things sort of in order. But Aaron, I appreciate you bringing that up. But let's start with, we have a threshold question to get to some extent before we get to that next procedural question. But first, barring anyone else wanting to weigh in, I'll sort of save myself for last, if you don't mind. Candidly, I think, I'm just going to just come out and say it. I think supporting scenario one is the only fiduciary thing we can responsibly do here. And I think it would be fiduciarily negligent to roll the dice, spend $9 million till 2040. And as Aaron pointed out, wait another 10 years and spend perhaps another increasing amount. As I think Taisha pointed out, it's only going to get more expensive, compoundingly so. And so we're just spending the money on a hope, an unlikely hope that the federal government is going to somehow side with us when they've swatted so many others down. I just think that's the Muni 2.0, and we didn't learn our lesson the first time. So I think it's important for us to maybe learn it again here and not go down that path of futility. This wait and see that I'm hearing is not a policy choice. It's really just kicking the can down the road. And we've already effectively kicked the can for 3 years. So this is a choice point, and it's an important one that we take it to give certainty not only to those that want to see an airport become viable in our community, but even to those that don't like the airport. We need to give some certainty, and we need to make sure that we can do so and move on. But moving on doesn't mean that there's anybody who loses in this community, because we get to define an airport for the future. Part of why we have an airport we do now is because we have not taken the opportunity to create that certainty from which to define an airport for the future. This can be the most sustainable and environmentally focused airport in the region. It can be an envy around the state, but we have to choose to want to do that. And these things are important for us to consider. And there's grants and opportunities to bring new business to our community, to bring those jobs and to catalyze a strong economy around an airport of the future. And I do have to say, if scenario 2 is where we go, there's real harm in that. And those trade-offs are going to hurt the very core services that we've been struggling to protect. And so I think that works against the values. It certainly works against what I heard in the last election cycle, that people want our core services to be addressed. And if we say, sorry, we're going to have to harvest another 500,000 a year from those core services, goes against the promises we've made to community in these hard financial times. So I think with all of that, I think it's a pretty obvious decision for us to go with scenario 1 and let staff do what they do best, which is take that direction and execute the best possible policy going forward with their mandate to follow that direction. So in any event, let's move on. Let's talk about a straw poll in terms of, do we want to pick? I saw Ryan. Do you have a question, or is Aaron's process sort of aligned with what you were angling for?
No, I have a process question, but if I do, or I don't want to interrupt you. Should I do it now?
If you got a question, let's do it. But I'd like to get to these straw polls because we are now running way behind.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm actually, I know my view, but I'm actually not sure which scenario it is. So I think maybe this is a question for Teresa or Nuria about this word indefinite. So whether or not to operate the airport indefinitely. I think of when we operate something indefinitely, that's what we're doing with the Alpine Balsam facility. That's what we're doing with the new fire department. Indefinite means we are planning to move it forward. We have no plans to change it, but it's a long-term commitment. So I would support that for the airport, but I don't support a perpetuity commitment. So I'm not sure if I'm scenario 1 or scenario 2, or if there something else we should be defining in that. So that's a question for Teresa and Nuria.
Go ahead, Nuria.
Sure. I was going to say for me, it's a hard distinction to make. And I understand the question, right? Like the choices we make to acquire land or to consolidate into Alpine Balsam, we're not thinking of those as anything but perpetual, if you will, right? Those are long term. We're not thinking about that's only a 10 years and then we're bringing it down. It's just an unusual situation where we have the word perpetual attached to what we do. And I would say it's not something new that it is currently attached to what we're doing. And so decisions to open an airport and to have that as a city amenity have led us, whether we knew that 30 years ago or however many years ago before, have now led us to perpetual at the moment. The question, I think, is, will it remain in that use moving forward? And I don't have a good definition of what's indefinite and what's perpetual in this scenario. I don't know if I have mucked it up for you, Teresa.
No, I'm just trying to get us to a straw poll. I don't know if there's any more that can be sussed out because I think the question is very clear. And I think we just have to get to our straw poll. And then there is a process question that Aaron posed. Scenario 1 is, do we wish to give direction to operate the airport indefinitely? I think we all know what that means. We know what that entails. We know what that triggers. And we can vote that. Scenario 2 is, do we wish to have an airport which keeps the closure opportunity available to us and not pursue those things that would lock the airport in perpetuity? So we need to get to this straw poll. I think we're circling it. We're trying to get to something that isn't really there. So I'd like us to get to this straw poll. And so I think that's what we're going to start with right now. So let's see if we can get folks to raise their hand who supports scenario 1.
I did have a mini point of clarification, but I'm gonna let it go. It was minor.
Okay. So I see 5 people in support of scenario 1. Please raise your hand if you support scenario 2. Okay, I see 4 hands for supporting scenario 2. So it looks like the preference to staff has been given to support the direction of scenario 1 to operate the airport for the foreseeable future which is likely an indefinite time frame. So, okay, I just want to quickly ask for staff, is that enough to answer that first foundational question for staff? Do they have what they need? I see a nod of a head from Nuria.
Well, I was gonna allow Blythe and Eric. Do you have what you need?
Yes, I think this gives us the direction we were looking for. I'm pausing because I'm not sure I understand the process here either, but
well,
yes, you've given us direction. So
staff posed the question of scenario 1 versus 2. Through a straw poll, 5 council members gave preference to scenario 1 and 4 council members gave preference to scenario 4. So in terms of the questions, the comments, and the straw poll, I'm sort of just asking, was there anything else that you feel you need in order to move forward with the direction that you were looking for?
No, thank you.
Awesome. Great. So I see Taisha with a question. We do have this process question that Aaron brought up. We're trying to move through it because we are behind, and we just want to button this up so we don't keep Jonathan here longer than he needs to be with our next subject. So Taisha, what you got?
I just had a point of clarification that decommission option is always on the table. It's whether or not the feds will respond. When you gave scenario 2, it sounded as if it wasn't on the table, or scenario 1, it is always on the table, was my understanding. Thank you.
That is a great point of clarification. You are absolutely right. You could ask to decommission at any time. And I think our city attorney and city manager have clarified that, but thank you for reminding us here at the very end as well. Thanks, Taisha. All right, so Aaron brought up a process question about whether or not we wanted to affirm this direction at a point in the future. But to clarify, since we did give preference to scenario 1, and in our current ordinances, we have an ordinance that already explicitly states that we will be operating an airport. Are we good with just giving direction and it kind of just validates the ordinance that's already on the books, or is there a preference to give some sort of resolution or revalidate that commitment to that ordinance? And so that is, I guess, Aaron, was that really kind of what you were looking for in terms of your process and your procedure question? And then if that's something what you're looking for, if I'm rephrasing that correctly, then I would perhaps ask council if there is a preference to either go as is with the ordinance that's already on the books, or look to reaffirm the commitment to that ordinance. So I just want to check in with Aaron since he brought that up. And Teresa, at any point, if I'm misstating how that process would play out, please interject accordingly. Aaron?
Yeah, well, I just, I heard some folks being not fully comfortable with this only being a discussion at a study session, and I shared some of that discomfort. So yeah, I would suggest the idea of bringing back a resolution that we could have a recorded vote on okay. Some future meeting on consent.
Thanks for clarifying. So let me ask Teresa, since we already have an ordinance on the books that clearly dictates the operation of an airport, and we just gave preference towards continuing the pursuit of that policy, how would you suggest process-wise at a future date of more or less reaffirming that commitment to address this concern about doing so in a different forum other than a study session?
According to the charter, council acts by resolution, motion, or ordinance. Here, there's already an ordinance, so you could have a motion or a resolution.
Is there a substantive difference between the two? Motion or resolution?
Without having contemplated which would be better, I wonder if council would like to consider the question of whether to take formal action at an upcoming meeting to document this. And then if council supports that idea, let us come back to CAC with a recommendation.
I think that sounds very reasonable. We'll let you figure out what the best path for us to do that is. So what we'll do right now, Taisha, I see your hand up.
This is a next steps question related to now that this decision has been, or whatever we're calling it, direction has been provided. I'm curious the possible impacts to the Boulder Valley Comp Plan update and if there will be opportunities, and this, I don't have to have the answer for this, but I am curious. There is a whole future of section of that plan. And, a lot of the things that we had talked about today, there's some really big picture things that I don't think that the community has had a broader conversation around as it relates to the Boulder Valley Comp Plan. I'm also curious about, it is a community asset that I do think, similar to our agricultural portfolio, should be considered for special designation. So again, not necessarily for this time to have the response, but I am curious how the airport plays in the Boulder Valley Comp Plan update. Thank you.
I will say that we have there, I know, Brad, I'm gonna take you up on a private offer, but I know that we have the airport is mentioned as part of the current plan, as part of the draft plan. So
Yeah,
that
no.
conversation continues. Brad, maybe you have some additional information to share.
So good evening, Brad Mueller, Director of Planning and Development Services. So I appreciate the question, Councilmember Adams, and also the recognition that the comprehensive plan does cover things such as that. We would anticipate a policy similar to the one that was in the draft plan, but we also know that that would lead to other planning processes in the future as part of implementation. But you all will get the recommendation draft as we talked about in the next few weeks, and that can be a point of additional discussion either individually with us as staff or in the collective.
Okay, I just want to know when we can revisit that conversation around the energy generation, because that is urgent and important. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Taisha. Thanks, Brad. All right, getting back to our preference in terms of next steps. So let me ask for a straw poll. Would council like to give direction to staff to at a future date, at a future regular meeting, create some sort of formal mechanism from which to enshrine the direction we gave tonight to staff in more formal action, and leaving the city attorney's office and staff to work out what that best formal action is at a later date. But would we like to give staff direction to curate that, and then of course CAC to schedule it? So if I have that sort of stated correctly, I'd like to see a straw poll. Would council like to see us do that? That looks nearly unanimous. Okay, so Teresa, is that clear? And Nuria, is that clear for you guys with regards to coming back with some formal action, whether it's a motion or resolution? We'll leave you guys to decide that and work with CAC to get that scheduled.
It is, thanks.
Okay, wonderful. All right, well, without further ado, any staff, you good, feeling good? We got what we need? Last check-in before we move on to the next thing.
Thank you, Councilman Benjamin, and everyone.
Awesome. Blythe, Eric, everybody, thank you. Teresa, Nuria, thank you for all the great work on this, the memo, answering these tough questions, and being a part of a really tough community conversation. So thank you guys so much for that. And Brad, thanks for the quick pinch hit on a subject matter that's slightly outside your purview, but thanks for being ready to answer Taisha's question on that. So thank you. So without further ado, we're going to transition to our next subject, and I'm going to turn it back to our city manager, Nuria Rivera-Vandermeide, to introduce the next subject.
Thanks so much, council member. I'm not quite sure the next topic is any lighter. We have, this responds to a council priority that truly is in response to some concerning trends that we have been seeing with increased power, public safety power shutoffs or public shutoffs. We know that we are facing more and more high fire, high wind dangers. And in response, we have, and certainly appreciate Excel has been proactive in trying to ensure the safety of our community. But in so doing, however, that has led to other consequences as we think about resilience and readiness and how our community is impacted by those shutoffs. So you have put forward a council priority for us to really evaluate and think about as we move forward. So just appreciate that. I will hand it over to our Director of Climate Initiatives to get our conversation started, but just appreciate the great interest in this conversation that you have brought forward. Jonathan?
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Nuria. I think you just had all of my introductory remarks, so I could maybe just make this a whole lot quicker. Good evening,
we're done.
Mayor. Good evening, Mayor, members of council, and I want to say thanks to you, Councilmember Benjamin, for facilitating tonight. I'm Jonathan Cohen. I serve as the Director of the Climate Initiatives Department. I'm mostly here in support of our Energy Manager, Carolyn Elam, and our Engagement Manager, Darren Wagner, who are going to be giving tonight's presentation. I also want to say that our Senior Electrical Engineer, Lex Teleshak, I think he's hanging around in case you have some super technical questions tonight. So just a couple of things from me, just reiterating a little bit of what Nuria just said, but I think our discussion tonight on power resilience is one of those issues that I like to say until recently, most of us didn't spend a lot of time thinking about. But over the past few years, as we all know, we've experienced a huge shift in both the frequency and impact of power outages. And I think most of our community are feeling it pretty directly. And that's what led to council making this topic one of your 2026 priorities. So not only are we seeing more outages, they're lasting longer, they're affecting larger parts of our community, and it's not random. It reflects a pretty fundamental shift in the system itself. And that's because the sorts of outages we're experiencing are tied to how utilities are managing wildfire risk, and they're becoming more frequent, longer, and frankly, more consequential, meaning they aren't just occasional disruptions anymore. So I just wanted to talk about a couple of things that are driving this. We all know that because the grid itself can be an ignition risk, Xcel Energy is proactively shutting off power during high-risk conditions. So as a result, we've all added a new acronym to our vocabularies, PSPS, or Public Safety Power Shutoffs, which are those planned outages during elevated wildfire risk. Xcel's also using more sensitive system settings that can trip lines more easily. And these are becoming, I think, standard wildfire mitigation tools for a lot of utilities. I want to stress one point, and that is while they clearly have real impacts for our community, the strategies play a really critical role in reducing wildfire risk and protecting public safety. And at the same time, we have an aging grid and more extreme weather. So I think taken together, this is really a structural change in how the grid behaves and what we can expect more of going forward. I want to speak directly to community members who are watching tonight, and I want to say that we know these experiences go beyond inconvenience. These outages affect people with medical needs, businesses trying to stay open, people working from home when the internet goes down, and critical facilities and services that the city provides. So we have this moment where risk is increasing, expectations are increasing, and the system is under more pressure. So that's what really sits behind the work in front of you tonight. Our staff team has worked really hard to develop a structured way to get our arms around this. So what's outlined in your materials for tonight is an approach to better understand what investments are being made, where the real risks are, both now and over time, and what the city actually has the ability to make a difference in. So when it comes to the infrastructure, we know we don't own and operate our energy system. We do have influence through our partnership with Xcel, through our regulatory engagement, through our own investments, and especially how we support the community in preparing for responding to future outages. So just to wrap up, I want to say that council made this a priority for 2026, but clearly this is a much longer effort, which is why we've designed this work in phases, leading to a policy roadmap around a set of practical options for council to consider. Tonight's really about making sure we're pointed in the right direction before we get too far down that path. Carolyn is going to cover a lot of detail, but what we're looking for tonight is council's feedback on the approach, whether there are additional strategies you think we should be exploring, and whether the engagement plan reflects the kind of community conversation you'd like to see. So I'm excited to hand this over to Carolyn, who is going to walk through the details.
Great, thank you, and good evening, Council. I'm Carolyn Elam. I'm a Senior Manager in your Climate Initiatives Department. I'm also the Partnership Manager for our partnership with Xcel Energy. Just briefly, as Jonathan mentioned, our goal tonight is just to kind of ground us in the impetus for this project, review what we have planned through the rest of the year, really dive into our community engagement approach. And we have Darren Wagner, our engagement manager, here to discuss that with you. We've made progress so far, so we definitely want to share that with you and then have a discussion to make sure we're headed in the right trajectory to align with your council priority. And I just want to say how much we appreciate that you have elevated this to be a council priority. We know it's really critically important to the community. And you know, it's an opportunity to really share the realities of where we're at and where we're going. And I think this is just really important for all of us. Again, we have 3 questions for you tonight. I won't read these. We'll come back to these. It's helpful to start in understanding and kind of grounding this for the benefit, make sure we're all starting from the same place, and also for the benefit of those watching us this evening, to understand the complexities of the electric system that serves us, because it's really underpinning the experiences our community is having right now. Our system is served from the east and west from transmission lines that serve 6 different substations and then over 30 individual power lines from our community. The graphic on the right shows you by color how those different power lines lay out throughout our community. You can see it's a massive spider web that overlaps, and because of this, you can have 2 homes sitting right next to each other that have a very different reliability experience. And this is because they happen to be served from different power lines with different realities in terms of where they stand in terms of reliability. The other thing I would point to is that we have power lines that are exclusively serving inside the urban center of the city of Boulder, but we also have a number of power lines that serve out, either come into the city from unincorporated areas or extend out into those unincorporated areas. And it's these particular lines that are the topic of our wildfire concern, and I'll talk about this more in a minute. As Jonathan noted, over the last 2 years, while reliability has always been a concern within our community has experienced a dramatic decline in reliability. This is in terms of outage frequency, outage duration, and how much of our community is simultaneously impacted by outage. This definitely changes the context of what we're experiencing. And there's no silver bullet. While Jonathan talked a lot about wildfire mitigation, we're seeing other forms of outage with growing concern that I'll talk about as well. And, just for example, I've highlighted a section of our community over here on the right, and the map here is showing you, it's one of the data sources we have, frequency of outage. This is an area of our community that's been particularly hit by multiple outages. I believe they've had more than a dozen over the last year. And it's because they've experienced every one of the bullets I have highlighted. They've been included in wildfire safety. They've had weather-related damage, equipment's failed, there's been car crashes into equipment, and also construction-related outages, right? So there's no single experience that's contributing to this, but we have to understand all of them to know how to improve the experience of our community. We hear a lot from the community about Xcel's use of power safety shutoffs. Why now? What's changed? It's always been windy in Boulder. Power lines have always been vulnerable to wind. But the reality is our winters are warmer and drier. The conditions have really changed. The windiest months are historically in the winter months. On the left, we typically had snow and precipitation. As I heard earlier, we've had like 3 drops of snow this winter. Like, the risk is much higher. And our current reality is that the strongest winds are coming in our highest wildfire risk now. And we've learned what can happen when power lines come down in these conditions. Over the last decade, nationally, some of our most devastating wildfires have been related to power lines coming down in windstorms and drought conditions, taking lives, destroying thousands and thousands of buildings, and causing billions of dollars in damage. We have to learn from this. It's the reality of the risks that have increased with climate change, with our growth into these higher risk areas, so expansion into wildland areas, and the aging of our utility infrastructure. So we do, again, appreciate that Xcel is taking steps to protect our community, but we also understand that they have to also improve the system. So Xcel's approach to wildfire mitigation is really 2-pronged. There's the immediate role of de-energizing lines so they cannot spark a fire if they fail under the highest risk conditions. So public safety power shutoffs are in the most extreme risk events, so the top 1% of wind speeds and low humidity, but enhanced power safety settings are used more often, and we certainly see outages related to this, on red flag warning days. In parallel, though, they're working to harden the system so these tools become increasingly less necessary, and so that fewer customers are impacted and they can restore power more quickly after the events. So hardening means targeted undergrounding, designing to new wildfire standards that didn't exist back in the day when much of our infrastructure was constructed. That's covered wire, non-sparking equipment. Improve situational awareness, so using weather stations so that they don't necessarily, and controllable devices so they don't have to initiate the events until the winds actually materialize. So we're not seeing outages when the winds actually don't occur. And then sectionalizing, which is breaking the grid up so that they can really target where the outage is occurring. I thought it'd be helpful to illustrate kind of how this concern promulgates in our community and what Excel is doing. So I'm highlighting an area of Boulder. This is North Boulder. The map on the right is showing you the wildfire risk map. This is the state map where the increasing red is a measure of wildfire risk. This area here is one that has been included in each of the 4 public safety power shop events that Excel has conducted in the city. So this area has been impacted. It's largely within the Boulder city limits, relatively north of Violet. There's a little bit of dispersity in that, but you get the general sense from the map. And really this also is because of the power line that serves this area, but also the mountain areas. So you may recognize this photo. It's Highway 36, and you'll recognize the power line that runs along there. This line actually runs up Highway 36 towards Lyons. It turns off at Never Road. It also serves up into the foothills along Lee Hill Drive. It serves areas north of J Road, which we could all agree are kind of, large grassy lands, and then North Boulder, which is the urban environment. So it has nothing to do with the area inside the city limits in terms of wildfire risk, but rather how this line spreads off into the foothills and some of the grassland areas to our north. The plan to mitigate this is to underground roughly 5.5 miles of this line, so where it runs along Highway 36, to sectionalize the foothills areas so that near term North Boulder can stay on during high wind events, and then to rebuild the foothill sections to new wildfire standards so that, again, all of these areas that have been impacted recently over the long term in the coming years will gradually be reduced from these types of events. So that's how the wildfire mitigation work is intended to work. But wildfire safety operations is not the only outage we're seeing. As I mentioned, we're also seeing increased damage due to weather. And this is not because winds are getting faster or necessarily stronger in the regard of speed, but we're seeing events that have a lot of shear force to them. So they're behaving like tornadoes, which are extremely damaging to these poles and, more importantly, to the vegetation. We have a lot of drought and disease stressed vegetation in our area due to the effects of climate change. We also have a lot of mature vegetation that's aging out, and these are causing greater damage when they do come down on power lines. The plan is to start to increase some of the vegetation management to reduce the exposure to this. Again, this will take some time, but this is leading to some of our longer outages. Many of the lines that were proactively shut off also were damaged during these windstorms. Many in our community are confused because we're also seeing outages on blue sky days, days when it's not windy, days when we've had snow on the ground. And the reality is that we have an old system that was put in place when Boulder expanded, particularly in the 50s and 60s, as well as again in the 70s and 80s timeframes, that's now reaching end of life, of useful life. There's a large amount of infrastructure that's kind of in that age bracket, and we're starting to see it fail. Some of our most impactful outages outside of the wildfire safety operations have actually been associated with the underground equipment serving Boulder. So these are lines put in kind of the 70s and 80s timeframe that are reaching end of life. They're stressed by some of our water plane and soils, so they're starting to fail. We've had 2 major failures and emergency replacement by Excel. And we also think that the inclusion of some of these in some of these wildfire safety events is accelerating some of this decline. So we're seeing an increase in these types of outages immediately after wildfire safety outages. So this is really the impetus for the council project this year, is to understand this, to understand with Excel how they plan to fix this problem. And I just want to be clear, is our expectation that they make improvements to the system. I believe it's their expectation that they make improvements to the system to at least restore us to more historical trends in terms of reliability. And we would like to see that go even farther and be more consistent with some of our peer communities. So the goal is to really understand from them the whole scope of investments. We have a good understanding of wildfire investments, but there's more that needs to happen. So this is kind of the first phase after we have this check-in with you, is doing this analysis, data gathering. Darren will talk about our community engagement plan. This is really to understand from our community how people are being more successful in these events versus more challenged in these events, to learn best practices, understand how we can better support them, and then gather all of this on input on the different strategies we can pursue. We're doing this project in close coordination with one of Council's other priority projects, which is around enhancing Boulder's wildfire resilience, and then come back to Council with kind of this roadmap of what can take place in the 2027 and beyond timeframe, to continue to push towards improved reliability and resilience. Councilmember Schuchard had asked a question around how we're going to measure success. We do have a number of means to measure progress. I'm showing here, I'm not asking everybody to understand this, but this is just showing that there are standards for how utilities report reliability. So we are capturing that data, we're trending that data, and benchmarking that against other utilities within our state, as well as Excel's peers nationally, to make sure we're trending in the correct direction. We also plan to measure the investments that are being made, continue to track how much line is moved from overhead to underground, how much area of our community has been caught up in terms of vegetation management. So these are some of the metrics we're looking to capture. So with that, I am going to pass this over to Darren for a minute to talk to you about our proposed approach to community engagement. I think. Darren?
Okay, how about now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
Apologies, thank you. Thank you, Carolyn. Good evening, council members. My name is Darren Wagner, she, her. I am the climate engagement strategist for the department, and I am happy to be here tonight to talk about how we are proposing to go through this conversation with the community, knowing that it's both a continuation of conversations we've been having, as well as a prelude to others that we want to keep having with our community members. And the purpose of this phase is sort of fourfold. We want to continue, as Carolyn was doing just a moment ago, to build understanding of these complex systems. It's a lot of information, very technical, and we want to make sure that we're all working from a level playing field in terms of what those base conditions are. And as Carolyn mentioned, we also want to use this as an opportunity to understand different communities and how they are navigating these power outages, how some are more successful than others and why, what needs are remaining among some of our community members. And really, as we're going through this process, rather than it just being extractive in terms of what we're looking for, we also want to offer value for the community as we go and look for ways to improve preparedness for these power outages. And so we'll be partnering with the Office of Disaster Management, for example, as well as others. And really the heart of the set of questions that we have for community during this process is for help evaluating and refining policy options that we'll come back to you and present on by the end of the year. So we have certain segments of the community that we want to make sure that we reach out to and engage with. We know that our frontline communities are not only at the greatest risk of some of these same conditions that Carolyn was just describing. We also know that there is a lot of wisdom and resilience inherent in the experiences of these communities, and we want to elevate the lessons and the knowledge from within them to really understand how we can learn from them more broadly. We want to also recognize the importance of connecting with those that are experiencing these more frequent or extended outages, like Carolyn was pointing out, as well as community members who are experiencing medical and mobility needs, seniors, as well as our business communities. So we'll be using different strategies to reach these different segments. I want to say that part of our established citywide decision-making process, as many of you know, is to really start from that foundation of information and inquiry. And like I said, because this is such a set of complex conditions and questions, we've been doing some work already in terms of putting information out there to help translate that material into understandable resources. So we do have a website available for community members that are listening tonight, and as well as a number of subsidiary pages like FAQs in relation to power outages, as well as information on undergrounding. And really, this is all related to a town hall that we held in late January following on the December PSPS events as well. And building off of that foundation, we are looking at a phased approach to engagement this year, the first of which would happen over this summer, where we do strategic engagement to those neighborhoods with direct impacts in frontline communities. We would have online engagement opportunities that really would seek to engage the broader public as well as our business community to get a poll on and a sense of how they're experiencing power outages and resilience. And then the centerpiece of this engagement window is also a workshop that we'd like to set up with partners from our chambers of commerce, from Boulder County, partners within frontline communities, leaders, some of whom have received funding through the Climate Equity Fund through Boulder County, and who are leading a lot of this great work around this idea of resilience hubs. We want to learn what is active in this space, what efforts and needs are being addressed, and which needs are still remaining, so that we can come out of that workshop with a stronger map of what are the remaining needs and opportunities to pursue. And as Carolyn will remind you at the end, we also have an opportunity for Excel to come to City Council later this summer so that you can hear directly from them. What that would do by giving us sort of a broad set of information and input from our community as we sort of narrow the funnel and work towards consensus around a set of policy options to move forward with. The second engagement window this fall would really center around what's called a community and council forum. And for anyone not familiar with that format, it's an opportunity for community members to really engage directly with council and vice versa in a two-way dialogue, very different from a public hearing or open public comment. And it's an opportunity to really explore more deeply how these priorities are emerging, what are the experiences that our community members are going through, and for council to hear from members of the community that you might not tend to get an opportunity to engage with. And we're hoping that that council forum would be an opportunity to really focus in on those priority efforts, so that when we come back to you with a set of policy options, it's a reflection of consensus that we've built with the community to date. As with any roadmap of sorts, there is additional engagement that we know we want to continue or build on as we look towards implementing a number of aspects of the roadmap that we prioritize for next year. So with that, I will turn that back to Carolyn.
Thanks so much, Darren. So with that, we'll just give you a quick snapshot of some of the progress to date and how we're tackling this. Because, I mean, we've been at this for a while and addressing these concerns. So while the priority is focused on this year and developing the roadmap, there were a lot of things in flight and things still in flight that I just want to highlight. Again, we were very successful in our advocacy at the Public Utilities Commission in supporting Excel in advancing their wildfire mitigation plan and really securing the investments that are necessary to reduce the risk to our community. Similarly, we supported them in their distribution system plan, which will bring some of the investments that rebuild some of the aged infrastructure within our community. We're intervening in their electric rate case, and next week we'll be filing comments into the Public Utilities Commission around emphasizing the importance of improving reliability and trying to create more incentive to ensure that they're successfully delivering on the commitments to our community to improve reliability. We're also engaged with the legislature in the reauthorization of the Public Utilities Commission, referred to as the Sunset Bill. This includes making quality of service programs mandatory, and we've got some amendments proposed there, and improving penalties and other ways to support us as we seek to improve reliability. In your memo, we also highlighted some of the data we've been gathering in terms of reliability and metrics. We've also begun to develop what we're calling risk zones, which are tied to exactly, instead of census blocks as typically reported, tied to who is served from different power lines within the community, consistent with the map I showed you earlier, because these would be the areas of the community with common experience in terms of reliability, so that we can better understand the demographics within those risk zones and who was being more disproportionately impacted and where supports might be more necessary. We've been working with Excel, met with their engineers, walk through town, propose mitigations to reduce outage impacts and keep power up for more of the community. And I just want to say thank you to council for supporting our ordinance change last month, which will allow us to create a fund to reinvest in the community to support some resiliency. More to come on that in the future. Excel's making progress. I won't read through all this. There's a lot of things in flight. In final permitting, final design that begins to harden our system. They've hired and added personnel to support our partnership, so lots of progress there. And soon we'll be announcing work on the vegetation management that's going to be coming. Just want to highlight this. This is in your memo again. These are some of our initial policy options that we've identified that we would be doing some of the engagement around this summer. So continuing to push Excel on grid hardening and infrastructure investment, supporting more local resources to build in resilience more broadly. As Darren mentioned, a lot of this is really integrated in helping the community be more prepared, because we cannot get to a future where there's no risk of outage. So really that capacity building is very critical. Again, our advocacy in regulation and legislative pathways. There's opportunity to think about city-led investment where we need to shore up our critical infrastructure. And of course, all of this should be grounded in some equity-centered resilience strategies. So these would be the policy where we would continue to refine this through the engagement and conversation with Excel. Next steps, we do plan to provide you an update early this summer on progress on the project. Darren mentioned we'll kick off the engagement window in that early summer timeframe. We've scheduled Excel for a study session August 27th, and then the Community Council Forum, which we're tentatively looking at October 8th for that date. So with that, I will return to our questions for council and look forward to our conversation.
Thank you, Carolyn, for that. Thanks, staff, for putting together the memo and that presentation. That was great. It was a good update. I know we've got a lot of questions. And so, Alicia, thanks for putting those in the chat as well for the questions for us to refer to. So starting with number one here, does council have any questions regarding information presented on the current or future state of that's the airport one. Sorry, does council have approach including the proposed analysis and development of a power resilience roadmap align with city council's expectations for this priority? So let's start with question one and see if council has any thoughts on that. Rob, go for it.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Jonathan, Carolyn, and Darren for all that work and the presentation. Just around the community engagement piece, for example, the power lines are being buried on 36 towards Lions. At some point, they're gonna surface. Is that and the wind may be further north. So am I right in saying those lines are still susceptible to a PSPS for Boulder if it's shut off in Lions?
No, so Excel's service doesn't extend all the way to Lions. It basically stops up around Never Road and then heads east. That's actually, I believe, Poudre Valley that takes service along the 36 corridor north. So Excel's plans are to underground all of their lines in that high-risk area just north of town. So that would remove that area. And then with the sectionalization of the foothills area, they can shut the foothills off until they complete rebuilding that and keep North Boulder on.
Okay, so those undergrounded lines would go to the substation and then come out.
It may still be overhead in town, just for clarity. They're not going to underground like right along 28th Street because there's some conflict in the right of way. But those are not the wildfire risk areas that they're concerned about. The concern is on the north side of town.
Okay. And then my other question, just when they are undergrounded, what does maintenance look like that for those lines? Because I have heard, there are certain things that can happen underground, like animals and things like that, and shifting soils. Are those as easy to maintain as a fiber optic line, or is that a full dig up?
Yeah, and thank you for raising that, Councilmember Kaplan. That is one of the trade-offs and one of the reasons I think our utilities have tended to prefer overhead lines because they're easier to maintain and quicker to repair. We see better reliability overall in underground lines, but if there is an issue, they are harder to repair. And we certainly, have seen some improvement in how new infrastructure is put in. You're correct. We have had issues with wildlife getting into underground gear. So it is a risk. I mean, it's not immune from outage. They tend to have a 50-year lifetime and be overall very reliable. It certainly removes the wildfire risk, though, which is the principal concern in that area.
Okay, thank you.
I was going to raise my own hand. Anybody else got a clarifying question for staff before we sort of look at answering that question? I have a quick couple. One is in the memo, and I've heard these numbers thrown around, is that 71% of the 165 miles of infrastructure are undergrounded. I find that number extraordinarily misleading because when you look at where the actual critical wildfire risk is, most of that is not undergrounded, and that's the west side of town. And so I'm sort of curious of how do we normalize that number to be more accurate, more or less, to the harm and the risk that we are defining and that residents see every day? Because people hear that and they go, oh, Excel's doing great. Then they go outside and look in the neighborhood and they go, oh, not so much. So how do we balance that?
Yeah, no, thank you, Councilmember Benjamin. You've certainly named one of the challenges. Our west side of town was one of the first developed, and so that's where a lot of our overhead infrastructure is. And it's also where a lot of that infrastructure is back of lot, so more challenging to maintain. So we tend to have a lot more vegetation. Also, our biggest wildfire risk is not in the city limits. So that number is far different when we start to talk about lines in the county versus lines within the city. We've been proactive in driving lines underground in the city. So I think this is again why we're looking at these reliability risk zones, because we do have the analysis. We have to be a little cautious about what we share publicly because some of that is sensitive. But certainly we're analyzing each of those zones based on what is overhead and where that overhead sits in terms of risk. So that's kind of the goal of trying to quantify each zone by its outage propensity or start to characterize that. So that's part of the analysis effort we're doing this year.
Okay. Last question, and I see Nicole and Ryan there, is it's maybe a sort of a silly question, but why are we doing this, and why isn't Excel making this investment in time and money to actually understand what's going on in the communities it's harmed by, shall I say it, the BS that they have here? Hard to be cheeky about it, but it's just not sort of acceptable that we're taking the time and money to understand the risk and the harm that their actions are imparting on our community. So I'm trying to wonder, how do we reconcile that?
Yeah, and I think I would, object to kind of the characterization that they aren't doing this as well. I think we're in a unique position to learn together because of our work in municipalization, right? We have a deeper understanding than any other community about the infrastructure that serves us and what's connected to that. That's really unique to community, right? Excel's not going to know all the details about how our infrastructure is served, how our infrastructure is critical in the function of city services, right? So it's that partnership together that's really valuable. And in our conversations with Excel, what they're learning from this experience, they're trying to extend to other communities. So I want to be respectful. They care about this issue too. They've got an amazing team of engineers trying to solve for this, but they're dealing with a very large problem, and it's a new journey for them as well. Public safety power shutoffs, while have been in use for a while, have unique characteristics in every community that they impact, because nothing's served exactly the same. The impacts are not exactly the same. But I do think we really benefit from the fact that we have this expertise locally. I mean, there is no other community in 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 this region that has a Lex Talishek. I just want to say that, right? We get appreciation from their engineers of what they've learned, the creativity, how we problem solve, and it's because we've been intimately looking at our system. We looked at it intimately for a decade under municipalization. So we do know the characteristics of it in ways that you can't unless you're deeply involved in it. So that I think that's really why we're where we're at.
All right, I appreciate that response. All right, Nicole, you're up.
Thanks. I guess I'm wondering where accountability is in here. I mean, it seems like it's more agreements and saying people will, they'll do specific things versus having, metrics, binding outcomes, consequences, things like that. And I guess I'm just like, why would they need to follow through on the things that are in here? I guess is my question.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's an important tension to name because again, we don't regulate Excel directly. That's I think one of the reasons we spend a lot of effort intervening at the Public Utilities Commission to gain a little bit more backbone to our agreement. So for example, the wildfire mitigation work, some of the projects we've discussed are part of an actual settlement agreement, which is a binding agreement within the Utility Commission record around some of those projects. So there is some accountability built into that. And we're going to continue to advocate for more. But it is a challenge. I mean, I just want to be transparent that addressing all of these, there's not great mechanisms in place today to hold them accountable to correct everything. So all we can do is kind of lean into our advocacy and think about some of those solutions. Jonathan, anything you want to add on that one?
No, I think that that's right. And it makes me think about the work that this council did in signaling to Excel the importance of this work and the letter that you transmitted to Excel. And obviously there's not penalty that was included there, but I think as Carolyn pointed out, we're using the avenues and the opportunities that we have to build that accountability that you're talking about, Councilmember Spear. And I think it's a really important one. I don't think it was explicitly noted in the roadmap, but it is something that the staff team has talked about, which is, so what if they don't do the things that they say they're going to do? What is that recourse? Does that mean that staff just does more, that the city does more, that we try to find the funding to do the things? No, that's not the answer. So right now we have, because it's a system that we don't operate or own or regulate, the appropriate pathway is to work as hard as we can in partnership with Excel to get the outcome that we want, while simultaneously thinking about what if they don't. So I don't know that that's a great answer for your question, but it's one that we're also thinking about.
All right, Nicole, you done? Okay, awesome, thank you. Ryan, go for it.
Thank you, Jonathan, Carolyn, and team. And thank you for responding to my whole conference agenda worth of a hotline. I really appreciate you going through all that and being so diligent. So I want to ask you two questions, just kind of building on that and something Nicole said. So one is just like your vision for when this work is done, or at least like most of the problems we're talking about are solved as far as we like generally have reliability back and or resilience to sort of make it work. Can you offer any kind of a vision on like how long is this going to take, and what will it feel like when we get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think our grounding goal is what I said earlier, which is our community should experience, we're an urban community that should experience good reliability. Most people should not experience outages, if ever, certainly not of a long duration under normal environmental conditions. Like that, it obviously excludes disaster. We benchmark against communities so that's the end goal. We're certainly far from that, as you saw from the data we showed. I expect that the public safety power shutoff impacts on the community are going to be significantly less, if not more or less eliminated by 2028. So within the next 2 years, and most of the projects we've identified will take some time. There's some pockets that are longer duration, but the bulk of some of what has to happen in our community, rebuilding some of our substations, is a 10-year plan. So just for transparency there. Now, that doesn't mean we won't see material improvements fairly quickly in the coming years, but I think the full rebuild and investment that needs to happen is more like a decade-long plan. So that's what we're expecting. You know, that's going to include, again, there's need to rebuild like the downtown substation, prepare for, you know, development and redevelopment in some of our target areas that don't currently have substation capacity. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Great. And just to make sure I got it right, I thought I heard you say you're imagining PSPSs could wind down to zero by like a couple years from now?
Yeah, within the city center. You know, understanding the foothill areas are a little bit more challenging. There's a lot more, you know, fingers that go off in those areas in high risk. But within the city boundary, what we see from Excel is solutions that address most everything that's of concern right now.
Okay. And do they need anything from us to implement that, or are you just kind of looking into observing what they're doing and just it's like it seems like that's what they're on track for?
Yeah, I mean, we're partnering with them to you know, get access to right of ways, access to open space that they need. So there's a lot of collaboration in that regard. You know, one of the big projects that's a little bit longer timeline there is the reconstruction of the transmission line that comes into town. You know, we'll have to have a conversation with council about that and the implications to the community of that project. But and some of the projects may require additional support in their next wildfire mitigation plan, which would cover 28 and beyond. So we would support them there. But I think in terms of wildfire mitigation, I feel like they're very solidly looking at that plan. I think there's a lot more uncertainty around some of the other reliability issues we're experiencing.
Great. Okay. And then my other question is kind of building on what Nicole was saying. So you, in your reply to my question about focusing on outcomes and being really grounded in what we're trying to achieve and having measurement for that, I think I heard some agreement that yeah, that's a priority. So if that's correct, can you just walk through a little bit more about like the sort of, I guess like the plan and the timeline to build our system of outcomes and measurement of them and like with Excel? And is that a few months process? Is that a couple years? And are there points in it which council is, you want to involve us with any of it, or just like and presumably, there'll be some push and pull with like what's easier, what's harder. Like just how do you kind of see that all sussing out?
Yeah, so I mean, most of what we've presented to you, I think we have a path forward to collect, so the performance metrics, but just understanding they're updated once annually, so it's going to take some trending to really see if we're achieving improvement. I think I don't know that we need intervention on that per se for the plan that we have. I want to give Jonathan a moment. I felt like he had something to add to the earlier topic as well. So Jonathan.
I did, but for the sake of time, I'm going to use my comment time to answer this question, because I think it's really important to say to you, Councilmember Shard, that we strongly agree that this idea of establishing clear, measurable outcomes and the infrastructure to track and report them is foundational. It is not secondary to the plan. At a high level, we see, or at least I see, three categories of data. One is data that we have relatively strong access to today. And so you saw some of that represented in the response, the hotline response to you in terms of the thing that we can collect. We have facility level information for city-owned assets. We have demographic indicators. Then the second category is data we can access with partnership, and we have to refine. So that's trying to get more granular, Boulder-specific outage data. Circuit level information, utility investment plans fall into that category. And then the third, I would say we don't yet have a real good sense of the timing on this one, is data that we have to build. And so that's the experience-based metrics, what residents actually experience during outages, critical facility inventories across public and private sectors, more integrated data sets related to vulnerable populations. So that's less about raw data availability and more about building the systems, building the partnerships and the governance to bring it together in a usable way. And so I just want to point out that I don't know that we yet have a good sense to answer your question of how long that all is going to take. That is the purpose of the roadmap. That is how we're trying to pull all this together. And I think as we come back to council over the next couple of months, we're going to be able to give you a snapshot of how we are building that, where are the pain points, what's working, what's not working. So hopefully that helps answer the question, but I think it's a very important one.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. All right, Taisha. Oh, I think Taisha, you're muted.
I just had a couple questions. The first is just on the reporting requirements and, what is the city's authority as it relates to having, articulating reporting requirements, kind of to the question that was asked before is like, for research and evaluation, who holds on to what? Are we being duplicative? Are there ways that we can align and synergize not only the reporting, but reporting frequency and grain size?
Yeah, thank you for that question, Councilmember Adams. So built into our partnership agreement with Excel, we already have a pretty good foundation for some of the reporting that we need. So in our partnership agreement, we've outlined things like we get an annual outage report that breaks down outages by each power line. So a lot of the data we need. We get reports on how the vegetation management and investment. So I think we have a solid foundation from the agreement. So that's embedded into our franchise. So we have a level of accountability around that.
And similar for evaluation. So for example, surveys and focus groups and those kinds of things so that we're not duplicating efforts and, particularly for our frontline communities, I have concerns around what I call, stakeholder fatigue. And so just kind of curious how, and this also kind of dovetails on the community engagement question as well.
Darren, you want to take that?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question, Councilmember Adams. I think that one of the things we recognize and want to build on is that a number of our partners have relationships with aspects of our community where they have been able to understand impacts of the PSPS events, for example. And so we would work before asking any additional questions of our frontline communities or our business communities, for example. We would first reach out to CU, to the chambers, to Boulder County, to others that might already have asked these questions to try and reduce that engagement fatigue.
Okay. And then are there efforts around, I see a lot on rebuild and expansion, capacity, and even investments, but has there been any kind of strategic thinking around trying to own more aspects of our grid? And just from an ownership perspective in general. I mean, I know where we landed. I'm constantly curious about who owns what, and I just have some real concerns around who owns what.
Yeah, I mean, on the poles and wires portion, no, I mean, I think the community, wanted to go back under franchise and Excel's responsible for those. We're certainly exploring opportunities, different program models to, help support building local resilience. I think I mentioned, distributed resources. I mean, I still think there's opportunities of exploring microgridding in certain areas. So those are things that I think are still that they're longer game things that we need to look at. But I think they're of interest to us, and we certainly are having conversations in the community about different models where the city can support development of that.
Okay, thank you. That's all at this time.
Thank you, Taisha. All right. Well, with that out of the way, let's just to give staff some clarity here. Let's before we move on to the next piece, just double check. Does the proposed approach, including the proposed analysis and development of a power resilience roadmap, align with City's Council's expectations for this priority? If that's the case, can I just get everyone to give a thumbs up if they are feeling that that stuff is aligned, and that way staff can feel validated there? Okay, good. So I see pretty much everybody with their thumbs up, so that'll help with that one. Moving on to the next one, are there additional policy actions or strategies council would like staff to evaluate as part of the power resilience roadmap? If anybody's got some additional policy actions, see some hands. All right, Ryan, first up, go for it.
Thank you. So actually, I think the balance of what you've got going is great, and I just want to call out two things. So thing one is this outcomes issue of making sure that we're clear about outcomes from a community-wide perspective while also looking at critical facilities and vulnerable populations. There's a ton of richness and diversity and all that. And I think as you, Caroline, had kind of got to, for us to do this well, it's going to require a really close partnership and trust and a lot of working as a team with Excel. And by us, I really mean you, staff with Excel in large part. And so one thing I just worry about a little bit is the dynamic of that. We're very eager to do this. Excel, from their perspective, Boulder is one of 120 communities, and so just I guess I have high expectations and hopes for what we could accomplish, but I'm also just wanting to make sure we're learning, council's learning. If I don't know. I guess I would that we're setting our expectations appropriately, and if things go slower than we expect, I'd love for us to know about it, or just to have some kind of a check or accountability in there to make sure we understand how that's going. Because I'm sort of trepidatious that it's going to work. It's so important, but just the power dynamics and the different interests. It's not like a foregone conclusion that it's all going to work swimmingly. So anyway, that's a sort of a partly formed thought. And the second one is on, just on our work that we can do policy advocacy, legislative, regulatory, and other. I think that the market incentives that create the economics based on policy that creates the incentives for their business model is just foundational to what they do. And I think one of our highest ROI areas of all of this is to make sure we're being really strategic with our state policy advocacy. And I know the IGA team with you and all working on that, and I just, I look forward to an even more heightened focus on that in our IGA work as we go forward, that we're just being really smart about creating business models and incentives that create fixes for these problems without raising ratepayer rates at least more than we have to. So otherwise, great. Thank you.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, and that offer to be our phone a friend. And rest assured, I mean, I just want to be transparent. We're coalition building. Like, we do not expect to do this all our own as a city organization. We're in conversation with the chamber, with regional partners. And I think that we'll want to continue to keep the pressure. So I appreciate you kind of naming that, Councilmember Schuchard. And we'll certainly keep you apprised of when we're running into speed bumps, because certainly there'll be some along the way. Jonathan, anything you want to add to that? You went off mute.
No, that's fine. Yeah, we'll keep rolling. I have a comment and then I'll just hold it.
All right. Taisha, go for it.
Just two quick things. The first, just curious if relocation was considered and where, if not here, that would be considered, and specifically if within the city of Boulder limits, God forbid, until that we have something like the Marshall Fire. Again, when I think of Area 3, the only thing I would really consider is for opening that would be for temporary relocation. So just, again, as we think about the power of resilience, recognizing that there might be need to include considerations of relocations, whether temporary or more, it's kind of like that next step after community resilience hubs. If folks need to be there for a couple of weeks, a couple of months, a couple of years. Just curious that's my first of two questions.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I think within the scope of this current project, we're really kind of focused on the non-disaster component at this point, but certainly, I think I think the learnings from this would certainly inform some of that. I'd have to look, to some of my partners in other departments to really, talk about the disaster preparedness, and like really what happens if there is the need for
I'm
displacement.
talking about relocation. So I'm talking about recovery and
Yeah,
response more so.
yeah.
And we did have that lunch and learn around that, which I asked for, which was very helpful. However, in my time on council, I have not had any conversation or heard about any conversation as it relates to relocation. And again, given what we've seen in the response at Marshall and who has been able to return and who has not, even from an equity and affordability perspective, I'm just curious if this isn't the space, where is that space? And again, not necessarily for us to answer right now, but I'm hopeful that it's happening somewhere in that.
Let me jump on, take a swing at this one. Councilmember Adams, I'm happy you brought this up because I think it speaks to the necessity of really connecting dots to other key priorities, particularly our emergency response and some of the other departments that are centered in this work. For tonight, our goal is bringing this forward as a work plan that is really intended to be responsive to the council's priority and grounded in what we believe that we can accomplish well this year. And I think what we've outlined is what we believe we can commit to in 2026. But that said, I think what you're bringing up is an opportunity to note and evaluate when things emerge. How do we bring those and kind of fold those into other work streams so we don't lose them? I would not see what you're describing as a central piece of how we set out the roadmap in terms of the reliability and resilience of our infrastructure, yet it connects to some of the other key priorities of our community. So I'm not saying it's not part of this, but I don't think that it's central to what we can accomplish in 2026.
Yes, I agree in the 1 year time frame. However, again, our artificial time frames are not meeting the moment. And so if this happens quickly, there's not, we have not had any meaningful, rigorous conversation around what that means. Also, for a power resilience roadmap, I would think that the relocation component, again, I don't think it needs to be an extensive component, but if we're moving people, then where we move them to would need to have energy. So just thinking from that perspective as well. But I hear you on the 1 year limitation due to things that are outside of our decision-making power, and I honor that. I will now go to my last question, which is around the airport and considerations for solar generation there.
Yeah, thank you. I was on for your question around that. We did look at the airport as a potential site for solar development. I think as Eric mentioned, when you consider development on airport sites, there's glare considerations, so that eliminated some areas. We looked at using the structures out there and they aren't sound for holding solar, so it turned out to not be a great opportunity for solar. We're continuing to explore that site though.
Well, not an opportunity for those two pathways, but if you were to actually construct short term, then was that
Oh yeah,
considered?
I mean, I think that there's some other pathways.
But
So
that
roll the
wasn't
site
considered.
out. It's a great location to think about opportunities. I mean, I think we're continuing to look at what grid capacity is available to take that. So it is a site on our short list of city facilities that we want to continue to look at renewable opportunities at.
Thank you, Carolyn. I appreciate that. Just kidding. There's a third one. And that's just in general. One of the things I'm having challenges around related to giving priorities or expectations around things is not having the costs of these. And I know that in the plan it talks about the costs are coming, but I've noticed a pattern in how our city makes decisions around this, where we come up with a plan, there's no money attached or no very limited projections. And then, the arts blueprint, I've seen it. I mean, I can give a variety of different examples. And again, we know that we are in whatever financially restraint 3.0 is. And so I'm just, when we talk about the prioritizing, I'm assuming that the team is thinking about it from that financial perspective. But as I said, having this conversation without having those numbers and then and being in a position where we have a very short turnaround on the budget approval process, it feels difficult to, I'm just hopeful that we can get, some more financial information or options before we go into the budget cycle.
Yeah, I think from a timing perspective, so it's certainly our intention by the time we get to the roadmap to provide some information on the financial implications and opportunities around different strategies. That will include examples like one of them would just be bidding into Excel's Resilience Hubs RFP, which would be a lower cost, no cost. The other extreme is if council wanted to underground the other 29% of power lines, that's a several $100 million undertaking. So we would try and bound it in that way. From a timing perspective, this would come in the fall, so it would be more towards a 2028 budget conversation.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Taisha. Tina, you're up.
Yeah, thank you. Just a lot of gratitude for all the work that's been done in this. When we discussed the priority, this is exactly what I was hoping for. And it gives me a lot of understanding about what work is being done. And as on council, especially in this role where I have no technical expertise, but I'm just someone who experiences outages, it's really helpful for me to be able to tell the story of what the city is doing to the rest of the community, and this presentation does it well. So just sort of my feedback on what happens moving forward. Along with the community engagement, I would love to think about whether community would like to hear the same thing that I'm hearing tonight in maybe a more accessible way, so that they can understand all the work that's happening and that the timelines are not centuries out, but actually within years, and that we'll have some idea. When we communicate that to community, that's often really what they're looking for after they complain that power shutoffs are terrible. And, whether you have a medical device, or whether you have a refrigerator loss of food, or whether you can't charge your car, or you don't have internet, the stories in terms of that kind of engagement of the experience, that's one thing, but making sure people understand that we're working on the solutions quickly, I think, is important. The other piece is during the community engagement piece, just getting specific on how much information people need to know. So for instance, if they're saying, I need a solar charge battery, it's kind of like when we were talking about what kind of fencing you get in the new wildfire world. Specifics might help because there's so much out there. Any way to give people specific information on what they can access might be helpful as well. And then the last thing is just understanding, just like we did that water analysis with Area 3, understanding what is our capacity for new significant energy users in the community, and are we working ahead to meet those future needs? Or are we still kind of playing catch up in terms of power shutoffs? So those are the kind of the things I'm thinking about. But otherwise, this was really great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for that feedback, and couldn't agree more.
Fantastic. Thanks, Tina. Well, it looks like a number of folks provided some additional policy actions and comments regarding the roadmap. Now moving on to question 3, which is, does council support the engagement approach as presented? I think Tina kind of front ran that question a little bit, but she could have another bite at the apple if she wanted to. Any thoughts? All looks good. I see thumbs up. I see people looking at brevity. Thumbs up, thumbs up. Nice. I'll just say I love that we're going to do another community assembly, because the first one was a smashing success. Community loved it. I remember staff loved it. Council loved it. I know it's a lot of work. So picking the right topic to do that at these intervals, I think is perfect. So I just commend staff for not forcing community assembly on an issue that maybe wasn't broad enough and of deep community concern. Not that other issues aren't, but had that depth to it that a community assembly justifies. And so just appreciate you guys using this topic in this instance for that tool for how we expand our engagement. So I just wanted to say a big shout out to the team for looking at that and building that expertise in-house so that we can do that. So that was awesome.
And if I might just, excuse me, Councilmember Benjamin, if I might just add a clarification. So through the Boulder Valley Comprehensive Plan, we did go through this extensive process that we called the Community Assembly, where it was a many-month process.
Yes.
This will be a slightly different method. So this is the Community Council Forum, which will be,
That's right, which we did.
Yeah.
Yes, right. So we did on economic vitality. Yeah, that's
There you
right.
go.
You're right. Sorry, I misused those terms. Thank you for catching me on that clarification.
Yeah, you bet, of course.
Yeah, people are getting random note cards in the mail that you've been selected, so we don't want to get people looking out. It's like the golden ticket and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Exactly.
All right. So thank you for that clarification. Taisha, what you got?
Yeah, I'm just going back to the community engagement. You know, we talk a lot about trade-offs, and I just would love to see more scenarios where we're giving community more realistic trade-off, decisions that need to be made, and specifically from a fiscal perspective, and not just looking within this one topic, but to say that if we pay for this, that means we will not be able to pay for that. You know what I mean? I just need more cross-departmental analysis and scenario planning, because that's our real life. And when we only have them focus on one area, that's just not realistic to the trade-offs that we're going to have to make. That's all. And then just the differentiation. So you mentioned, many of us work from home, myself included. That has one level of implication. We have our science and tech communities. That's another. So I appreciate the front line, but even front line is not the same thing. So just really trying to unpack the differentiation within each of those levels, and what to Tina's earlier comment, not only meeting community where they are, but recognizing the differentiation and grain sizes of information that is necessary related to their industry, or, again, to even the type of resident that they have, right? A big condo development is very different than single family homes. So just, again, I think that differentiation is something that I would like to see a little bit more in the engagement approach.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Great feedback.
Thanks, Taisha. All right, so I saw a bunch of sort of front runners throwing their thumbs up on the engagement. So it looks like that had some good feedback, at least on the thumbs up, of where staff's already looking to go on that. I'll turn to Jonathan, Carolyn, Darren. Is this, you got enough feedback from us with regards to things? I think Jonathan had this comment that he was holding on to. And I think he's saving it for last to give a nice closing statement. So Jonathan, what you got?
Go for it, Jonathan. I feel like he lost the internet services. It is on his phone again.
No, I'm actually at my computer. I would love to say, council members, that the power went out here in my office, but alas, it's just my computer. So it just, my camera just stopped working, but I am here. Thanks for the opportunity, Councilmember Benjamin. Yeah, there was a thing that was nagging at me a little bit, and it actually was related to your earlier question, and I don't feel like I sufficiently answered it, and it had to do with, why are we doing this rather than the utility? And one of the things that I wanted to say very clearly is, our intention is to not substitute for utility responsibility, but I do think we have an opportunity and a responsibility to leverage our role to accelerate and shape utilities action and not replace it. And that means that we can actually step into a place of really increasing transparency and accountability around Xcel's performance and their investments. And what we do well is we can target our investments and interventions where there are gaps. And I think that's a really important role that the city has continued to play. And that is something that the utility structure won't do. So how do we really target our vulnerable populations? How do we think about community scale resilience? And really investing in ways that make sense for the city to really participate in. And so I just wanted to appreciate the question that you raised, because it is foundational to our team and thinking about, what is our role? What is our responsibility? Where do we push? Where does it end and Xcel pick up? So again, I just wanted an opportunity to clarify some of my comments. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jonathan. Well, it looks like you guys got what you needed from us on this really important issue, not just to council, but certainly to community. And so I appreciate how quickly we turned this around as a council priority. And I think all of us are appreciative of how quickly you guys got this assessment and evaluation to us and got the ball rolling. So looking forward to that roadmap and future check-ins, certainly talking to our partners at Xcel. And that council community forum. I want to make sure I state that correctly. So without any further comments or things to mention tonight, Going once, going twice, at 9:13 p.m. Oh, I see Jonathan's hand up again.
Nope.
Okay. No, go stand.
Apologies.
Go stand. He just doesn't want to not continue to talk about this awesome subject. So I get it. He loves this stuff. So without further ado, at 9:13, we're going to go ahead and close out this study session. Thank you all for a great night. Thanks for great work on staff, and appreciate the thoughtful comments and questions from all of our council colleagues. Appreciate it. We'll see you again soon. Have a wonderful night.
Thanks, everybody. Really.